Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
I've lived in the Everglades all my life, most of it just south of Little Shark River on the west side of Oyster Bay. My place is right on the edge of the water, and my nearest neighbor is over a mile away. That's how I like it, too. I ain't that fond of people as a rule. I had me a little red-bone hound named Skeeter for the last 5 years. I spent a lot of time out on the glades hunting and fishing. No matter where I was going, he'd come along. I heard him barking up a storm out by the water early on Sunday morning about 3 weeks ago, though. I ain't seen him since. I've been worried that maybe a gator got him, or either that or someone took him. I'd almost rather be a gator. I got a chicken coop out beside my house where I've been keeping 4 laying hens. The building itself is small, maybe 6 by 10, and just like my house, sits up on stumps, about 2 feet off the ground in case my yard floods. Last Saturday morning, I went out to gather eggs, and one of my hens was missing. I looked around a good while and never saw no sign of her. It could have been a bird of prey that got her, but I figured it was more like coyotes. They've been getting a lot braver these last few years, not as shy of people as they used to be. Plus, Skeeter ain't been around to warn them off. Also, I've noticed the chickens ain't been coming out in the yard as often as usual, which is a pretty good sign that there have been predators around. This morning, like I always did, went out to get eggs and discovered that my hen population has gone from 3 to 2. I was more than irritated. I was flat out mad. I understood that coyotes and other critters had to sustain themselves just like me, but there are plenty of things out in the wild for them to eat. They didn't have to come for my chickens. Plus, they scared my other hens to the point that they wouldn't lay. I was gonna have to eat breakfast without eggs. I looked around inside the coop, but didn't see no sign of coyote or fox or anything else for that matter. So I went outside to see what I could find. Rained yesterday, so I should have been able to find some tracks of some sort. I looked all around the coop, though. Didn't find none at all. I was curious, mighty curious. I reckon it was possible that she'd wandered off down by the water, but that would have been unusual as well, especially for my chickens. My chickens stayed close. I'd never seen any of them wander off down towards the water. I was walking back toward the house when I saw something peculiar. It looked to me like there was a pair of eyes watching me from beneath the coop. Just little glints of light I could see in the dark. I didn't want to get too close in case it was something that might have come at me, like maybe a rabid coon or a fox, but I got as close as I dared and bent down real low. It's definitely a pair of eyes, but they didn't seem like no coon or no fox. Didn't look like no gator neither, unless it was a mighty small one. The eyes were just too close together. Finally, I decided to shine the light from my phone and see what it was. I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me by then, but what I saw beneath the coop was a snake. When I say snake, I don't mean a rat snake or a chicken snake. I mean a big-ass snake, like a python or an anaconda. Swear to God, its head looked like it was as wide as both my fists put together. And it was hard to tell because it was all curled up on the ground, but parts of his body looked to be as big round as my leg. I won't lie, it scared the shit out of me, probably because I hadn't been expecting it. It wasn't all that long ago that there wasn't any python or anaconda in the glades, but then ignorant city folks start getting them as pets. Once the snakes had grown to the people I'd realized they'd wound up with more than they bargained for, they just go let them loose in the glades again. Given that the snakes didn't have any natural predators in these parts, they've apparently done pretty well for themselves. Personally, I don't have nothing against the big snakes as a rule. It weren't their fault that they got put here. Just like everything else, they were doing what they had to do to survive. This snake in particular, though, had most likely eaten 2 of my chickens. Come to think of it, as big as that snake was, it might have been what got Skeeter. That made us blood enemies, me and that snake. And I intended to set things right. I went up to the house and got my shotgun, and on the way back I was already thinking about the belt or the hat band or even the boots I might get made from its hide. Big as it was, I could probably pick and choose. I got back down to the coop and shined under it with a proper flashlight, and to my surprise and discomfort, the snake was gone. That was startling. I gave a quick look around to be sure, but I wasn't about to get attacked. There was no sign of the snake. I gave a quick look inside the coop. There sat my 2 chickens looking at me like they wanted to ask a question, but were just too stupid to know what to ask. But they were alone. No signs of the snake inside. I went back out and started looking, making bigger and bigger half circles until I'd finally made it down to the water and saw several places that looked like where maybe a snake had slithered through, but couldn't be sure. I just hadn't been around enough of them to know for certain. Anyway, after about half an hour of looking, I decided that maybe I should put something up around the base of the coop to keep the snakes from coming back and hiding in there, where it couldn't lie and wait for my hands. I took some chicken wire and nailed it all the way around the building and then staked it into the ground till it was nice and snug. That snake would have to do some damage to itself to get past that wire. Otherwise, it would have to wait out in the open where it'd have to deal with me. It was a hot and muggy day already, so I was muddy and dripping with sweat by the time I'd finished with the chicken wire, so decided to take a shower before I'd breakfast. No great loss. I even didn't have any eggs. So I showered, which made me feel better all by itself. Once I got out, I caught my reflection in the mirror, so I stopped and gave myself a look. I could probably use a shave, but I hadn't given my straight razor a good stropping in a while, which meant it would yank my whiskers out as much as it would cut them off, so I just didn't bother. Started from my bedroom with my towel draped over my shoulder. I'd barely put my first foot out of that bathroom and into the hall when I saw it. Just a flash of something low and large coming at me. In that same instant, the big snake hit my leg, high up on the thigh, and the force of the impact knocked me off my feet and sent me crashing to the floor. Now, I heard people talk about how something or other seemed surreal, but I'd never truly understood what they meant until then. The pain in my thigh was immediate. I knew the snake wasn't venomous and that it didn't have fangs, but its teeth were plenty big and plenty sharp. I could feel them tearing away at my thigh muscle. It all happened in a hurry, too. By the time I'd found my bearings, I was lying on my side with that big snake wrapped around my leg 2 or 3 times and its mouth latched hard on my thigh. My God, that thing's head was huge. It looked to me like its mouth had bit down over halfway round my thigh, and I wasn't a small man by any means. That snake was still trying to get itself around me, too, around my middle. It already trapped one of my arms against my side, but the other one was free. I started banging on the snake, anywhere I could get at it. But it didn't seem to make any difference at all. It was solid, almost like a piece of wood covered in scaly skin, and my blows just glanced off it without making a difference. Whew, it was heavy too, big around than I could have reached with both my hands. It was all I could do to just raise myself off the floor with one arm free. But when I did, that snake managed to get another coil around my middle, more up towards my chest. By then, the lower half of my leg had started to ache from all the blood being trapped in it. My foot was tingling with 1,000 pinpricks. The snake was working its jaws too, digging its teeth further into my thigh. I got a glimpse of my foot. It was starting to turn purple. I think it was about then that my shock began to turn into panic. I could feel the snake starting to squeeze, like constant pressure getting heavier and heavier on my middle. It was starting to affect my ability to breathe too, like each breath I took was just a little bit smaller than the one before. A new wave of panic set in. Or maybe it was determination. Either way, I used my free leg to start kicking at the snake. The part that was wrapped around my other leg. Like when I'd be hitting it, didn't seem to faze the snake. I'd start rocking back and forth when I'd kick at it though. And before long, it seemed to me that the snake's coils around my middle were shifting. Like maybe it was trying to get its grip up higher. I was in full fight mode by then. And before too long, I managed to pull my arm free and lean up against the wall. Just then though, the snake tightened the length of its body and one of the coils was straight across my chest. It squeezed down hard, and I could feel my lungs starting to seize up. Like I said before, I'd lived in the glades all my life, and I've been out in the wilderness since I was a little boy. I've run up against gators and water moccasins, snapping turtles and panthers, hurricanes and droughts. Every danger there is the glades has got to offer, but never in my wildest dreams did it occur to me that I'd be taken down by a giant snake. One that wasn't even native to Florida. It truly was surreal, in the most bizarre sense of the word. I was hardly able to do more than pant by then. Snake kept tightening its grip on my chest with its powerful coils, little by little, inch by inch, taking away my ability to fill my lungs. I was starting to feel lightheaded too, like maybe I was gonna hyperventilate. I'll admit it, I was terrified. It was like I was staring the end right in the face, and there weren't nothing I could do about it. Thing was, I wasn't ready to die. No matter what the cause, I didn't feel that my time on Earth was supposed to end just yet. I was in a bad fix, but I wasn't done. Not while I still had any breath at all in my body. That's when I remembered my straight razor. It was sitting on the sink. After working at it, I managed to turn my body enough for my free foot to push against the wall, moving me in the direction of the bathroom door. But not only had the snake incapacitated one of my legs and hampered my ability to breathe, it was also heavier than hell. Trying to move with it all wrapped around me like trying to shove a bathtub full of water. I wouldn't relent though. I finally managed to grab a hold of that door jamb with both hands. And then I could pull with my arms and push with my legs. I got myself about halfway through that bathroom door and then I rolled over onto my back right next to the legs that held up the sink. My muscles were running out of air by then though, and it felt like I was losing my strength. I tried to roll on my side, but I wasn't able. Snake seemed to have readjusted itself around my chest in a way that seemed to give it more leverage, and it was squeezing me harder than ever. For a second, I thought I was about to pass out, but I fought it as hard as I could, fought to take in as much air as was possible. Finally, I managed to push myself to my side. I took hold of one of the sink's legs and started pulling. I pulled as hard as I could with every ounce of strength I had left in me until my hands reached the top of the sink. I held myself up with one hand and frantically searched around the surface with the other. Just when I thought my arms were about to give way, I felt the razor. Tried to grab it, but only managed to knock it on the floor as I lost my grip on the sink, and it bounced to the front of the commode. Not to be deterred, I managed to take in a few sips of air, and I started rocking my body. I rocked until I finally toppled over, banging my head against the side of the tub in the process, but that had got me close enough. I took up the razor and started trying to cut the snake, first one place, and then the other. But I was having little luck. I really had let that razor get dull. I focused the blade on one spot, right over its chest, and finally started making a little progress. The snake didn't relent, though. In fact, it seemed to intensify its grip. I felt something pop inside my chest, like a rib breaking, and pain immediately seared through me. I had no choice but to stop cutting. I fell over against the wall, feeling like I was about to black out, and through the tunnel of what was left of my vision, I saw that snake's head, still latched onto my thigh. Probably as a reflex more than anything else, I reached the razor at the snake's head and started slashing, hard as I could, over and over. Next thing I remember was seeing my bloody thigh, blood flowing from the wounds. Then there was a snake's head coming at me, at my face, at my hand that was holding the razor. I just kept slashing at it, punching and kicking with my good leg. About then, it occurred to me that I could breathe. It hurt to, but I could take in air. The snake had loosed its grip upon my chest. It was about then that the snake struck right at my face. It knocked me back against the wall and latched on from below my chin to the top of my forehead. I was nothing but a pile of desperation by then, though, and I kept slashing. At some point, I got the razor up next to the snake's jaw, and I started sawing. Pretty soon, it let my face go and fell away. I tried to stand up, but I didn't have the strength, so I just started kicking at it with my good leg. I kept that leg going like a piston, like a crazy man, screaming and cussing all the while. Pretty soon I realized that all the coils had pretty much fallen away from me, and at least they were loose enough to where I could wiggle my way out then. So I did. I rolled over next to the commode and kept kicking and yelling. The snake sort of regathered onto itself like it was preparing to come back at me. It occurred to me that most of its body was either in the hall or the bathroom door threshold, though, so I made a snap decision. I lunged at the snake before it could lunge at me, and I grabbed that door and I tried to slam it shut. I wasn't able to because the snake was still partially in the way. And damn, it was truly heavy as hell. But I was on the one side of the door and it was on the other. I kept pushing and kept pushing until finally I was able to close the door all the way. Once I heard the latch catch, I collapsed to the floor, thoroughly exhausted and heaving for breath. It was only then that I felt that pain in my chest again, like somebody was stabbing me with a knife with every breath I took. The pain was better than not being able to breathe, though, so I kept on breathing. I don't know how long I lay there. It was a while, but I finally came around. This wasn't over. I still had a huge snake in my house, and the only thing separating me and it was my bathroom door. Aside from the straight razor that had been my salvation, there weren't anything else in the bathroom of any use to me. Well, that wasn't entirely true. There was rubbing alcohol and gauze and tape. I could clean and dress my wounds, so that's what I did. The wound on my thigh was pretty gruesome. There was blood all over my leg. I wiped it down and washed it off best I could and gave it a good look. It was all mangled and still bleeding, but at least it wasn't pulsing. That snake hadn't got to an artery. Still, I had lost some blood, and I needed to do what I could do to slow it down. I poured the rubbing alcohol over it. Burned like a son of a bitch. And then I wiped it down again and wrapped it up as tight as I could with the gauze and tape. In one sense, I thought, I've been pretty lucky. Had that snake took hold of me about 2 inches higher than it had, could have done some real damage. My hands were all cut up as well, Some were probably from the snake's teeth and some from the razor, but none of them appeared to be too bad. I tried to stand up so I could wash them off in the sink. I found that I wasn't really able to. I had to pull myself up against the wall and then lean on the sink to keep my balance. My bad leg was still pretty useless. Felt like dead weight. Still, I washed my hands and took a look at myself in the mirror. I was a pretty ghoulish sight. Had blood all over my face. I washed it off and saw pretty much what I'd expected. There was an oval ring of little cuts from the top of my forehead down my nose and under my chin and back up the right side of my face. That snake had took hold of me. Like the cuts on my hand, though, none of them were bad. I just kept washing them off and putting pressure on them until they'd all stopped bleeding. I was worn out. I took a seat on the commode and started thinking. Above everything else, I was elated to be alive, but I knew I still had some hurdles to clear. I thought about trying to get out the bathroom window, but it was little and way up high. I didn't think I'd be able to get myself out of it in my present condition, and even if I did, what would I do next? Like I said, my nearest neighbor was over a mile away. No way I was walking that far. Keys to my truck were in the kitchen, and so was my boat key. My phone was in the bedroom, sitting on my bed right next to my shotgun. Everything I needed at that moment was in one of those two rooms. And the one thing those two rooms had in common? I'd have to go out into the hall to get to either one of them. As far as I knew, that big snake was still right on the other side of that door. I knew I couldn't wait in the bathroom forever, though. Could be that somebody would come for a visit today, but it was more likely that nobody would come around for a week or more. Staying put was an option, so I made my decision. Got myself a drink, rested just a little bit more, and then crawled over to the door. My decision? Again, I grew up in the Glades. I was going for the gun. It didn't take me long to work up my nerve. I turned the doorknob quiet as I could, and then I slowly brought the door in an inch, maybe two, until I could see just a little bit out in the hall. There's nothing there, at least not where I could see, and I opened up a little bit more, keeping my shoulder braced against it in case I had to ram it shut in a hurry, but still, that snake didn't show itself. Of course, I fully expected it to attack as soon as I put myself out into the hall, so before I did, I stuck my hand out as a decoy. Nothing happened. So real cautious-like, I peeked around the door looking one way and then the other real fast. I didn't see a thing. I opened the door the rest of the way and as quiet as I could, which wasn't very, crawled out into the hall. Moved towards the bedroom real slow, partly to keep the noise down, but partly because I just couldn't go very fast. The hall looked like a long tunnel like you'd see in those scary movies where you knew the person headed down it was about to run into disaster. I kept going, though. I wasn't going to be kept from my own bedroom by a snake, no matter how big it was. I finally made it to the threshold, and I could see the butt of my shotgun hanging off the end of my bed. Nothing to do but keep going, so I did. By the time I saw it, though, it was too late. It had been coiled up across a pile of dirty clothes in the corner, and just like it had done before, it sprung out at me like a flash of lightning. Seemed like before I'd even been able to move a muscle, it had latched itself to my shoulder and knocked me onto my side. This time, though, instead of laying still while the big snake had coiled itself up around me, I got them moving. First thing I did was push back as hard as I could. Then I rolled forward. When I felt it coming up under me, I rolled towards it, sort of bringing it back against itself. It didn't let go, but it hadn't been able to wrap me up yet, neither. I tried to stand up so I could get to the bed, but I wasn't able. My bad leg went out from under me, and I crashed back down to the floor, That's when it got to me. Before I knew it, it had two huge coils around my chest and started squeezing. My adrenaline was fueling me, but I knew I simply didn't have the strength I'd had the first time around. I could feel the snake's grip getting tighter and tighter. I knew I wouldn't be able to fight for long. As fate would have it, though, we'd fallen to the floor right at the foot of my bed. There sat the butt of my shotgun right over me, just waiting to be taken hold of. I still had my one good arm, so I reached up and grabbed it, and then I gave it a good pump. The snake's head was too close for me to put the muzzle on it, but it was a big snake. There were a lot of targets. I wedged the barrel underneath it and forced the muzzle against its neck as close to the head as I could get, and then I pulled that trigger. I don't think I'd ever heard a shotgun discharged inside a house before, but the blast was deafening. My ears started ringing, and all I could smell was the gunpowder right away. I could smell the blood too, and I could see where I'd splattered all over the wall. The snake's neck was so thick, though, the blast hadn't blown it clean in two. I gave that gun another pump, and then I gave the snake another blast. That time the snake's body fell away, leaving its head hanging from my shoulder by its teeth. I took a hold of the snake's head and pulled it off me. Then I flung it across the room. Snake's massive body was still moving in spasms, but nothing that felt like it had intent. I slawed off the coils from my chest, and then I sat on the edge of my bed and just stared at that snake on the floor. Must have been 16, maybe 18 feet long. How in the hell had it found its way up underneath my chicken coop? And how in the hell had it found its way into my house? Probably never know the answer to the first question, but sure as hell was going to figure out the answer to the second. If there was one of those monsters out there, there's bound to be another. And I had no intentions of going through what I'd just gone through again. I probably needed to go to the doctor so he could see about my leg and my ribs, but for the time being, I wasn't about to go nowhere, except to my kitchen, or more specifically to my refrigerator. I grabbed me a cold beer and took it to my recliner, even though it was before noon. And I took me a good long drink.
I never believed in the supernatural. Joey Bologna Baldwin, yeah, they called him Bologna, was the captain of the football team at my new school, Polka High. He was also in charge of harassing the new students upon arrival as well. He stood tall and slim, with the redneck equivalent of the California surfer look. His wife-beater lay tucked under his favorite camo jacket, and his tight blue jeans completed the package. I hated him before he even spoke. "Hey, new kid!" I kept my face down and my books clutched to my chest. There was nothing I wanted less than a conversation with that meathead. "You deaf, kid?" He reached out and grabbed my shoulder. "What's your name?" "Brian." I mumbled, looking at him. "Now leave me alone." "Hey, I'm just trying to invite you to a little get-together at my place this weekend." I stared at him and his group of hype men and wondered what kind of joke that they were trying to play on me. "You what?" I asked. "It's an initiation type thing, you know?" Joey smiled. "After that, we leave you alone." I had no desire to be intimidated, but I also had no desire to be harassed every day for the remainder of my stay at that god-forsaken school. I considered my options, and with a defeated sigh, I replied, "What time?" His friends erupted into barbaric cheers, fist-bumping and high-fiving each other. It felt like I was a cast member on some shitty MTV reality show. "Friday night, my place. My parents are out of town for the weekend. He grinned. What is this initiation? Oh, you'll see. He looked over his shoulder to his friends, who were all laughing. I hope you don't scare easy. I don't scare easy, but the way he and his friends were acting made me doubt my own fear tolerance. Over the next few days, I asked a few kids if they knew what the initiation was all about, but no one would say a word. It was apparently something that everyone knew about, though, because on Friday people started wishing me luck. My mind started telling me this was a bad idea, and my heart was trying to leave my chest and flee the scene. I sat on the school bus on my way home, thinking of all the things it could be. Nothing had prepared me for that night. Nothing could have. I arrived at Joey's house around 9 p.m. and knocked on the door. His home was tucked away in a wooded area, much like every other house in town, beneath a canopy of hanging trees. I must admit it was a nice house. The door opened and there stood Mr. Joey Bologna, wearing his school-issued polka dot sweatpants. Yeah, the high school mascot is the Dots. How stupid. And a white plain t-shirt. He placed his hand on my shoulder and gripped it tight. I didn't think you'd show. Well, I did. Hey, the new kid showed up, he screamed into the house. I heard a few hoots and hollers over the country music that was blaring from the kitchen. I felt like I was in a B-rate horror movie mashup, like Deliverance meets Scream or something. Want a beer? Joey asked me. Sure, I said. I figured I may as well get drunk if I was going to have to deal with these assholes for the night. Hey, Danny, throw me a natty, bro. Danny was one of the offensive linemen on the football team. He weighed about 340 pounds and was wearing his football jersey with the same polka dot sweatpants. Joey caught the beer and tossed it to me. I pulled the tab and had to immediately drink the beer that started spewing from the top. Chug, 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 the mob chanted. An hour passed and I felt the mood shifting. Everyone started whispering to themselves and looking at me, which made me uncomfortable. I started to become intoxicated. Why was everyone staring at me? It's time for initiation, people. Joey entered the room with an empty black sack. My heart started pounding against my chest, and I felt my forehead getting moist. I wiped my hands on my jeans and tried to calm myself. You ready? Joey looked at me. Yeah. Come with me. The party went into a riot as they chanted, Go, go, go. It wasn't nearly as inviting as the chug chant from earlier. I need to go to the bathroom, I said before we reached the back door. Number 1 or number 2? Joey asked. Not the question I had expected, but I didn't hesitate. I think I'm going to throw up. All right, initiation will have to wait, Joey said. The mob booed and started chanting, Pussy, pussy. Once again, I liked the chug chant better. Don't do that shit down here, bro. Bathroom's upstairs on the right. I worked my way through the angry mob and jogged up the stairs in search of the bathroom. After a few seconds, I located the door and made my way across the hall. I stopped at the entrance and listened for a moment. I stood completely still and could hear the sound of crying coming from the room next to me. Noticing the door was half opened, I glanced into the room. On the bed, crying, sat a beautiful girl wearing a blue nightgown with white lacing. Her curly brown hair fell to her shoulders, and I could see her tears from the hallway. She looked up at me. Who are you? Go away. So sorry. I stammered and turned to the bathroom. No, wait, don't go, she said, sniffling. Sorry, it's been a shitty night. I saw a picture hanging on the wall next to me. The picture was of Joey, his parents, his older brother, and his sister, whom I now realized was seated before me. "Come on in," she said, beckoning me. "I'm Vanessa." I can't," I said, trying to get the words out of my mouth. I've never been good to talking with girls, especially pretty ones. "They're waiting." She laughed. "Are you being initiated?" She created quotation marks in the air with her fingers. I stepped into her room. "Yeah, what's funny?" She motioned to the edge of her bed. "Sit down." I wiped my palms on my jeans and inched closer to her bed. I sat down, taking up the least amount of space as physically possible. A cool, coconut-scented breeze swept through the room, causing the hair on my arms to stand up like soldiers, in formation. "Don't be nervous," she laughed. "It's cute, though. I like it." Her olive skin was blemish-free. Her stare was inviting. Those words were all my heart needed to explode in my chest. Blood rushed to my groin as I struggled to speak. "What's initiation?" "Something stupid Joey and his idiot friends do to the new kids. They take you to the creek out back and make you sit under the stone bridge with that stupid black sack on your head. Then they all tell you a dumb story about a girl that drowned behind our house. They leave you there for 30 minutes while they try to scare you by making noises." She rolled her eyes. "They're so fucking stupid." I laughed. "That's initiation?" "Yep, that's it." She smiled. Her teeth were that of a Colgate model. What I had been so afraid of, anyway? I didn't even believe in ghosts. I was more afraid of them just kicking my ass. That was much scarier than sitting under a stone bridge. Vanessa scooted toward me until our arms were touching. Goosebumps appeared in my arms like bubbles of boiling water. "What's your name?" she asked. "Ryan," I replied. "Nice to meet you," she said with a smile. "If you don't mind me asking, why were you crying?" She took a deep breath and wiped the last of her tears from her drying eyes. "My boyfriend broke up with me tonight." "Oh, I'm sorry." Fuck him, right?" "Pretty much." "You, have a girlfriend, Ryan?" She placed her hand on my thigh and I nearly melted. Her emerald eyes burned a hole into my soul. No," I said. "I never have." "Never?" She bounced in the bed and grabbed my shoulder, pushing me in a playful manner. "Lies." "No, really, I've never had a girlfriend." I could feel the heat in my cheeks. Why was I telling her that? I should have just lied. "You're adorable," she said. She leaned over, putting her face in front of mine, her eyes radiating pure happiness, and kissed me. She kissed me. It was my first kiss, but it was worth the wait. My body tingled and my heart struggled to decide on a rhythm. I placed my hand behind her head like they do in the movies and slipped her tongue into my mouth. Then it was over. She pulled away and smiled. "Better get going before they see you up here." I nodded and stood up. I turned from the door and waved goodbye. She smiled and blew me a kiss as my insides tumbled around like gymnasts. When I made it back downstairs, everyone cheered. "About time, bro," Joey said. "We're starting to think you died up there." I laughed. "I'm okay, let's go." The mob escorted me outside, just like Vanessa had told me. I was instructed to sit under the stone bridge. Joey placed a sack over my head, and the sound of the creek filled my ears. "They're going to try to scare you. A girl died in this creek 20 years ago," Joey said in his best scary voice. "Her father was an alcoholic and used to use this bridge for punishment. He would put a sack over her head, like the one you're wearing now, and tie her to the metal latch at your feet." I moved my feet out of curiosity and felt a hard object. I bent over and grabbed the object with my hands. It was sturdy and had an opening large enough for a rope. At least they were trying. One night, as she sat tied up and hooded, it began to rain. It rained hard. Her drunk-ass father passed out in the house and left her there. The rain that night was record-breaking. The creek rose and flooded into the yard. The water wasn't even up to my feet at the moment. I had to move down to the water on purpose to get wet, but I could imagine how easily it would flood. If I were tied to the latch, my head would be below ground level. The girl fought with the creek, struggling to keep her head above water. She failed. Her father found her dead the next morning, and then hung himself by the tree to your right. I could feel a cool breeze blowing over my neck as I sat in the darkness. A tingling sensation crept down my arms. With the sack over my head, my imagination ran wild. They say sensory deprivation can cause hallucinations, and I believe them. I heard laughter that didn't sound human. The voices reverberated, making my place under the bridge sound like an empty cathedral hall. Two images appeared in the darkness in front of me. They glided closer and closer until they were identifiable. One of the figures was that of a young girl. Her hair was long and blonde, had clothing ragged and torn. The other was of a man. His face was unkempt, his hair long and greasy, his clothes dirty. He pulled the sack down over her head as she cried hysterically, struggling to get free. The man tossed an empty bottle of Jack Daniels to the ground and spit into the water. I could smell the alcohol in his breath when he spoke to her. Vanessa's warnings weren't enough to stop the fear from entering my mind. The images faded and I could hear the mob whispering, but their voices seemed distant. The sounds of thunder crashed around me like an angry orchestra. I felt drops of water splash against my skin, sending chills down my spine. The sound of rain pounded off the stone bridge above as I felt the water rising. Scared, I tried to stand, only to realize there was now a rope binding my wrists. I jerked with all my strength, but to no avail. I followed the rope to the creek floor and grabbed the latch. I thrashed in the water, trying to free myself from its clutches as the water rose to waist level. Faster and faster, the water rose. The whispers from the mob faded, and I could tell I was all alone. I was left to die in the creek, like the girl from the story. As the water rose past my neck, I did my best to angle my head toward the bridge. If I was lucky, it would stop rising just short of my nose. I strained with every ounce of strength I could muster as the water rose over my mouth, sloshing back and forth near the bottom of my nostrils. I tried everything to stay calm, and took one last breath before the water rushed over my nose. I could see the image of the girl struggling once more, and for a moment it felt like we were the same person. I could feel my lungs giving up as they burned inside my chest. I accepted defeat and cursed Joey and his friends for leaving me outside to die. I closed my eyes and gasped for air. I heard the sounds of the mob approaching again. Their voices became clearer as I struggled to open my eyes. "You all right, bro?" A voice I recognized as Joey's said. "You were screaming and shit, man. Fucking hilarious." Yeah, riot," I said as I removed the sack from my head. I trembled as I tried to regain my sanity. Joey gripped my shoulders with a fatherly squeeze. "It's over, man. Welcome to Polka." I walked upstairs to the bedroom and saw that Vanessa's light was still on. I decided to pop in and let her know how wrong she had been about the initiation, but when I pushed the door open, she wasn't there. I heard the fan in the bathroom running and decided to wait for her to get out. The sound of footsteps came stomping up the stairs. Danny appeared soon after, doubled over, attempting to catch his breath. "Don't run much, I take it?" I said. "Funny," he said. "What were you doing in there? Joey'll kill you for going in that room." I laughed. I'm sure he would. My memory of the kiss rushed back to me. "No, really, man." His tone seemed serious. Okay. I'll leave his sister alone. I turned back to her room and noticed the lights were off. The room was lit only by the moonlight, which left a dark blue tint on everything. Not funny, dude. I looked with wide eyes to the window. Hanging from the ceiling, garbed in a blue nightgown, with white lace trim, was Vanessa. Her wiry hair fell over her face, her skin decomposed and pale. She hung from a rope, and I could see the bruises on her neck from the break. Her left hand gripped a piece of paper. I turned to Danny, my heart pounding in my chest. I must still be under the bridge. I must still be under the bridge. Vanessa died 5 years ago, man. Danny said with a whisper. Her boyfriend broke up with her and she ran to her room and hung herself. Joey found her the next morning with a suicide note in her hand. I stared at him. My knees trembled from the fear of not knowing whether or not I was still under the sack. What did the note say? Danny looked at me and lowered his gaze to the ground. It said, "All I ever wanted was to be kissed."
Joe strode forward, taking wide steps through the knee-deep snow. Somewhere behind him rose the howl of the hounds, following him, drawing closer with each of his belabored breaths. "Goddamn dogs," he cursed, a plume of vapor escaping his lips. He drew his coat tighter across his chest and shivered. There was no escaping his fate. His tracks in the snow may as well have been a giant fiery arrow pointing directly at him. The dogs weren't even necessary. A child could hunt him down through these woods with the trail he was leaving. And it wasn't fair, none of it. Joe had never meant to kill the man, just to rough him up, scare him a bit. But the man had struck back, and before Joe had time to think, he had already drawn his knife and ran it into the man's belly. Stupid man. All he had to do was to give up the cash and he'd still be breathing. And Joe would be back at the bar, his feet up on the table and some new gullible woman on his lap. Engrossed in the sweet thought of the bar, Joe continued to trudge. Great white trees towered all around him, their canopies blocking what little sunlight remained in the day. His path had begun to steer uphill, and he used the trees as handholds, pulling himself as much as pushing himself. Panting from the exertion, he reached the top of the rise and surveyed the way he'd come. He could make out the figures of the cops, 3 of them, and the 2 hounds leading them closer and closer to Joe's position. He lowered his stance, trying to make himself a smaller target. There was still some light left after all, and he'd surely be silhouetted there upon the ridge. He looked to the opposite side of the ridge. It sloped down to a stream below, its water still running despite the cold. Joe didn't like the angle, too steep, and a bullet punched into the very tree he had his hand on, followed by the sharp crack of the pistol. Joe managed to stifle his cry, but was unable to keep his body from reacting accordingly. He drew himself quickly away from the tree and fell into empty air. There was a long moment of nothing, and then he was tumbling down the slope, his hands wildly scrabbling for purchase but finding nothing but loose snow. Joe landed in the stream, the cold sinking into his very bones just as the water sunk into his clothes. He twisted in the current for what seemed like hours before finding his footing in a shallow pool and throwing himself onto the stream's bank. He crawled forward, pulling himself along with his elbows until he reached a nearby tree. He propped himself up, his breath coming hard and fast like a blacksmith working his bellows. Joe looked to the ridge and squinted, trying to find where he had fallen. But there was nothing, or he'd been pulled along the water for long enough to lose his own trail. And if he'd lost his trail, maybe the cops did too. A small spark of hope grew within his breast, but it was not enough to drive away the chill. It gave the bastards the slip, he said, coughing. Only to die in the damn cold. He wanted to move, but by God, he was tired. Joe closed his eyes. When he next woke, the sky was empty of light but filled with flurries. The snow had risen over his legs and into his lap. He licked his cracked lips, a prayer forming there. Would God care about a thief and a murderer freezing in the woods? He couldn't think past the numbness in his limbs. He looked to the sky and saw a face. The woman stood before him, her body obscured by writhing flurries on the wind. Her expression was neutral, and her eyes empty, reflecting the white landscape. She tilted her head to the left, an unmistakable gesture. Follow. He didn't question her, considering his current options were follow or freeze. Joe struggled to stand, falling twice before finally extricating himself from the snowbank that had threatened to bury him. His legs burned as his blood flowed freely once more, but his feet stayed numb. He limped along behind the woman as she moved through the cold like a specter of wind and ice. The journey could have been a mile, or could have been a trek across a continent. Joe didn't know. He put one foot in front of the other, his eyes always on the woman's back. She wore a sort of loose gray robe. Maybe not a robe, but whatever it was had to be covering some warmer clothes beneath. Joe had on a thick coat and winter boots, and he was still pretty sure he was going to die before they got to wherever they were going. And goddamn, it was quiet. He didn't know if he'd been surrounded by so much nothing in his life. He thought back to when he was a boy, hunting with his pa during deer season, the cold just a brisk wind, and any snow hid in the shadows of the trees. But there had been noises then, the flapping of birds' wings, the crackle of falling leaves underfoot, soft crash of accumulated snow falling from the orange and brown canopy of leaves and branches overhead. But there was nothing but white here, and even the wind moved with an eerie silence. The only way Joe knew for sure that he wasn't suddenly struck deaf was the sound of his own breathing and the crunch of the snow beneath his boots. Just as his thoughts turned bleak and hopelessness sunk its teeth into him, they arrived. The trees opened into a clearing. Huts and lean-to shelters were set up along the perimeter, all of which were covered in at least a foot of snow, but all standing strong. Opposite the clearing's entrance, set into the hillside, was a cave. Its entrance was decorated in what looked like woven branches from where he was standing. The telltale glow of a fire lit it from within, its opening the most beautiful shade of orange Joe had ever seen. He felt his strength return at the thought of warmth, and his pace quickened. People began to poke their heads out of their shelters, eyeing him but saying nothing. He'd half expected them to be native, like in those old Western movies his pa had loved to watch. But there were men, women, and children of all races, dark-skinned, light-skinned, and everything in between. He found himself waving and nodding like an idiot, but he was so happy at the prospect of sitting in front of the fire that he couldn't bring himself to give a shit about how stupid he must look. As they approached, the woman stopped and gestured at the cave with one outstretched arm. Joe smiled and nodded, feeling giddy with relief. The decorations around the mouth of the cave were much more intricate than he had thought. Thin pieces of bark had been stripped from branches and used to tie together a selection of antlers, rocks, and even more branches. Black feathers dotted the archway, fluttering in the wind. Joe lowered his head so as not to get caught in the eye by an antler and went inside. Blessed warmth washed over him as he stood in front of the fire. It was a small cave, a pile of hay off to one side, and the fire pit in the middle, the smoke flowing up into a nearly imperceptible hole in the ceiling. Joe knelt closer and lifted his hands closer to the flames. Time passed. He wasn't sure how long, but the blood had thawed in his hands and they became sore from the temperature shift. "Hello." A soft voice came from behind him. Joe turned to see a man standing in the mouth of the cave. He wore the same no-color gray that the woman had, and although he looked as young as Joe himself, his dark beard reached down nearly to the blanket he held in his hand. "Hello," Joe croaked, his throat dry with disuse. "I brought you something to use while your clothes dry," the man said. "You can hang them on the rock over to your left." He passed Joe the blanket. "Much obliged," Joe said. "I'm Joe. What's your name?" "I no longer have one. We do not use them here." Okay, Joe said. "Is there anything you call yourself?" "You can call me Speaker, if you like. I am Speaker for our group here." "Oh, so you're like the representative or something?" No, the speaker said with a kind of smile. "I speak for everyone, if needs be. We do not get many visitors here, so I do not have to speak very often." Like monks? A vow of silence and all that? "Close enough," the speaker said. "Are you hungry at all?" "Yes, and my throat's as dry as a desert, too." "I understand. It is a very long walk here. I will bring you some food and water. All that I ask in return is that you stay in the cave. We take our silence seriously." Joe barked a short laugh. "Buddy, I ain't moving any further from this fire than I have to." The speaker smiled again. "Good. I will return shortly," he said and left. Joe busied himself with undressing. Peeling off the wet layers took some effort with his fingers having been recently brought back to life. When he was done, he hung his clothes over the rack as the speaker had suggested, and started to wrap the blanket around himself when he realized it wasn't a blanket after all, but one of the robe things everyone was wearing. He pushed his head through the hole in the middle and then looked down at himself. It was like a very long poncho, really. A belt of the same fabric hung on the side, one end stitched to the robe. He tied it around his waist and sat down again in front of the fire, watching the flames dance and feeling lucky to be alive. The speaker returned, holding a clay cup and a thin wooden plank piled high with steaming meat. Joe began to salivate and his hands shook in anticipation. "Here," the speaker said and held the cup out to Joe. "I would caution you to drink slowly. Too quickly and you may get sick. Joe nodded and lifted the cup to his lips. He drank deeply but managed to stop himself before taking too much. The speaker lowered the makeshift plate of meat to the floor. It was sliced thin and cooked enough to leave a little pinkish hue to the meat. Joe took a slice and bit into it. He was a man who knew the difference between a good steak and a great one. And whatever the meat was, it was divine. He finished chewing and swallowed. What kind of meat is this? Goat, the speaker said. I'm sorry if it's not to your liking, but it's all we keep here. No, it's great, Joe said, helping himself to another slice. I never had goat meat before, but I'm sure I will again. Good. I am pleased you like it. I will leave you to your meal then. Wait just a second, Joe said. You don't have to leave so soon. Tell me about this place. What are you folks doing out here? Is this like some kind of tribal land or something? The speaker stood. We can talk more in the morning. For now, just rest and be warm. We don't have actual beds here, but you're welcome to use the pile of hay there. It's not much, but it's better than the ground. And don't worry, I'll sit to the fire while you sleep. Joe nodded. Okay, sure, that'd be great. The speaker nodded. Sleep well, he said, and walked from the cave. In no time at all, Joe polished off the meat and sucked the juices from his fingers. He washed the last bit down with the rest of his water, which tasted like the earth, like the clay that held it. His belly full, he laid down on the hay. It wasn't really that comfortable, but it did keep him off the cold ground. His robe kept him from being poked and was actually long enough to cover his feet. Not thinking of anything in particular, Joe fell asleep. As sparse gray sunlight entered the mouth of the cave, Joe stirred. Waking came slowly and by degrees. First was confusion. Where was he? What had happened? And the second was the cold. He raised his head and blinked his sticky eyes at the fire pit. It was dead and black and gray. Not even an ember glowed within. It looked to have been out for hours. Joe got up slowly and walked to the mouth of the cave. It had been sealed shut against him. Branches as thick as his arm ran horizontally from one side to the other, with only a few inches of clearance between them. It took him a moment to process what he was seeing, and actually chuckled. Hey, he said. Hey, speaker. I don't know what's happening, but I don't appreciate being locked in here. I'm not dangerous or anything. Memories of the day before, of robbing the stranger in the parking lot, of driving his blade into the man's belly and wrenching it upward, of feeling the hot blood flow over his hand. The speaker walked up to the opposite side of the barricade. Good morning, he said, his breath a small puff of white. What the fuck is going on here? Joe spat. I don't know what your game is here, but I ain't playing it. Let me out of this cave. No. What? Joe said, laughing at the sheer audacity of the prick. You can't just keep me here. I've got a life out there. Do you? The speaker said coolly. Do you have a life out there? One worth living? Joe opened his mouth to answer, but didn't. As I thought, the speaker said. What do you have to go back to, Joe Everly? More things to steal and people to hurt? Are you going to go back and apologize to Wanda, your first wife, for beating her so badly that she still walks with a limp to this day?
How do you know about her? Joe said softly.
I know more than that. Tell me, if you were to return, would you go back to Texas and raise the child you abandoned there?
Stop it.
Or are you going to go back and turn yourself in for murdering poor Cole Howell yesterday? His only crime was that he made a quick run to the store for more diapers for his new baby.
I said stop.
I know these things, Joe, because I am more than speaker. I am also the listener, and I can hear things without you even telling me.
That's not possible, Joe whimpered.
Well, you'll have plenty of time to think about it in there. And I'll give you some friendly advice. Do not scream. Because, once you start, it is very difficult to stop. And that leads to madness. Besides, you'll be very hungry soon. If you feel a cry wanting to escape your lips, bite into it. Clamp it between your teeth and swallow. Eat your screams. Let them sustain you, and you may just survive this ordeal.
Joe backed away from the barrier, his mind spinning and chasing coherences like a dog trying to catch his tail. He couldn't think, but he did know the speaker's advice was a veiled threat. If he could just keep quiet, there was a chance. A chance at escape, and a chance at revenge. The cave grew colder and colder as the hours passed. Joe stewed in his anger as he put his clothes back on and let his hate warm him. Then he walked from one end of the cave to the other, seething with every step. He muttered as he walked.
These assholes don't know who they're fucking with. Gonna strangle them with their own goddamn robes. Burn their shacks. Steal the goddamn goats.
It wasn't until the sun began to retreat that Joe felt frightened. He trembled at the thought of spending a long, cold night locked in the cave, shivering and chattering. But what choice did he have? He wasn't getting through the barrier without an axe, and he wasn't slipping out the chimney hole without losing 100 pounds and becoming a contortionist. He was fucked. He collapsed into the hay and pulled the robe over him like a blanket. Sleep came slowly, but it came all the same. His shaking woke him sometime before dawn. A coughing fit left him out of breath and spitting phlegm. His sinuses were thick with it, and his throat ached from mouth breathing through the night. Joe stood on shaking legs and shambled over to the barrier, the purple light of daybreak shining between the branches.
Hey,
he yelled, then coughed.
hey.
He heard footsteps, then the speaker walked into view.
Yes, Mr. Everly.
Oh, we're using Mr. now, huh?
Hey, you sure are polite for a kidnapping son of a bitch.
The speaker sighed.
What do you need? Water.
Joe said.
Are you asking or commanding?
I'm demanding, asshole.
A smile spread across the speaker's bearded face. Good.
He waved his hand and a young boy ran over to him with a shallow clay bowl.
Here's your water,
the speaker said.
But first, I'm going to need you to undress and, hand over your clothes.
What?
The water for your clothes.
If you're trying to kill me, then just get it over with.
Your clothes, please. You may keep the robe for now.
Joe angrily undressed, then shoved the water clothes through the branches.
There. Now give me the water.
The speaker slid the bowl through the barricade. Joe snatched it, nearly spilling the water, but managed to get it to his lips. It was gone in 3 swallows.
More,
he said.
No,
the speaker said, picking up Joe's clothes from the ground.
Fuck you,
Joe spat.
At least give me something to eat.
The speaker shook his head and began to walk away.
Hey,
Joe cried.
You...
The speaker turned and put one finger up to his lips.
Eat the screams, Joe.
Joe sat staring at the barricade, watching as the dull rays of sunlight spilling through the myriad holes got longer. His stomach growled incessantly. It turned in knots and cramps like a fist ceaselessly clenching and unclenching. Dreams came to him, unbidden and alive. He was in the woods with his paw, hunting for days on end. Days that were always in twilight, a perpetual gloom that stained the world in gray and black. Pa put a hand on Joe's shoulder, stilling him. Shh, Pa whispered. There she is. Ahead of them in the clearing was a deer, its antlers branching out like hundreds of sharp searching fingers. It was the biggest animal Joe had ever seen. His stomach rumbled and drool ran from his mouth. Pa patted his back.
Go get 'em. I know you're hungry. It's okay to be hungry. Being hungry is what makes you alive. It's all there is.
Joe walked into the clearing, his hands out before him, one of them holding a knife. He drew closer until he was standing directly in front of the beast.
Why don't you run?
Joe asked.
Why are you just standing there?
The deer lifted its massive head to the sky, exposing its neck. Eat, it said, its voice ageless and seductive. Eat, and be satisfied. Joe tossed his knife away, grabbed and pulled the deer by the fur of its neck, and bit down. He woke with a scream between his teeth, fighting to get free. He shook and cursed and realized he was sweating, and oh God, did he have a fever? He wiped the sweat from his brow with the robe and sat up. It was fully dark. He'd slept through the day and now had no idea what time it could be. A coughing fit shook him, and he collapsed back to the hay, weak and afraid. Lying on his back made it difficult to breathe, so he turned to his side, pulling the robe tight against him. He looked to the mouth of the cave and his eyes widened. The barricade was gone, and he could see light in the distance. Freedom was right there if he could rise, could just sneak away into the night. Joe rose at a glacial pace, none of his limbs wanting to comply. He took one step, then another, and soon was performing something close to walking. He stopped to rest at the opening, leaning one shoulder against the cold rock and coughing until his chest burned. He surveyed the clearing through watery eyes. A fire burned in the heart of the clearing, surrounded by all the folk that lived there. They all stood silent, watching him suffer. The speaker emerged from the crowd and met him at the mouth of the cave.
"Hello, Joe,"
he said.
"You, survived. Why?"
Joe felt his lips crack with a tiny matchlight of pain.
"'Cause I wasn't about to let you win, bastard. You or your fucked up kin. That's it. Straight hate flows through these veins, and that ain't something you can kill easily."
The speaker nodded.
"Very true,"
he said.
"Come, we will feed you, and then you are free to leave."
Joe eyed him.
"What? That's it?" "You were tested, and you passed. That's it. I don't want anything more from you." "One last gift,"
the speaker said.
"and then you will be on your way."
Joe's stomach rumbled audibly. He nodded.
"Leave the robe here."
Joe didn't argue. He pulled the robe over his head and let it fall to the dirt. The speaker took him by the arm and supported him as they walked closer to the fire. The crowd parted for him to pass through. A naked man stood before the fire, passing his hands over the flames which shied away from his touch. Hands that were at the end of arms that were much, much too long. The firelight played over his alabaster skin, showing scabbed wounds like black stars in a white sky. It smelled of the grave, of bloat and rot. The man turned at Joe's approach, and it took the last of Joe's resolve not to scream. His face was more skull than skin, the nose missing, the lips equally absent. His mouth was a bloodied, clotted hole ringed with broken teeth. There was no breath coming out of it. Joe weakly tried to turn away, but the speaker held him in place.
"Watch,"
he said. The man-thing knelt in the dirt, and Joe looked into its eyes, confused. There was resignation there, sadness, and what looked like gratitude. The crowd formed a loose circle around the man and brought out their weapons. Clubs, crude farming tools, mallets. Everyone was armed, even the children. As if on some unseen signal, they attacked. No one cried out or made any noise at all. The only sounds were the flat smack of clubs hitting flesh, of bones breaking beneath the blows. Finally, the crowd moved away, leaving the broken thing lying in a widening pool of blood. The speaker shoved Joe hard in the back, sending him tumbling into the mess in front of him. He had no time or strength to catch himself and fell into the bloody mud with a splash. Joe recoiled in horror, lifting his face from the mess and spitting on instinct.
"It's yours,"
the speaker said.
"You have earned it." "What the hell are you talking about?"
Joe said.
"Eat, and be satisfied."
He wanted to balk, to call the speaker insane, but he could taste the thing's blood, and it was ambrosia, sweet and savory and metallic. Joe's hand shook as he lifted a ragged strip of flesh and held it before him.
The crowd began to chant, very low. Joe could only make out bits and pieces. He thought he heard them speak of the wind.
"Don't be shy now,"
the speaker said.
"Not when you found it so delicious before."
He didn't have to ask. He knew then that the meat he had on his first night wasn't goat. And if there was any doubt, the scabbed wounds along the thing's belly and thighs told the rest of the story. Joe placed the flesh into his mouth and bit down once, letting the flavor rest upon his tongue. But his hunger was a living thing, and he couldn't hold it in check any longer. Time ceased to matter along with everything else save the feast spread out before him. He tore meat from bone with his teeth, feeling each fiber snap, relishing the ripping sensation as it gave way. Strength swelled within him. He snapped the man-thing's femur between his tightened fists and lifted the cracked edges to his mouth so he could suck the marrow from within. His belly grew full and taut, but he kept eating, unable to help himself. He saved the eyes for last, popping them between his molars and letting the fluid spill onto his tongue. He was sated, and his limbs grew heavy.
"Sleep,"
the speaker said. Joe did. The sky was still black when he woke some time later. He was cold even though the fire was still bright and strong. And he was hungry. So goddamned hungry. Without thinking, he dug his fingers into the ground and scooped out handfuls of blood-stained earth. He packed his mouth full and chewed and sucked until he swallowed it all. It wasn't enough. He crawled closer to the fire and it moved away from him like a prey avoiding the slash of a predator's claws. He kept crawling, dragging himself into the heart of flames, only to watch helplessly as the flames grew weak and died. The speaker's voice came from behind him.
"That can't help you now."
Joe looked at him. The other man's features were orange, reflecting the light of his torch.
"What have you done to me?" "Nothing," the speaker said. "You earned it. Every day of your life, you earned it."
Joe leapt at him with his newfound strength and speed. He hooked his fingers into the fabric of the man's robe and drew back with a cry, his hands burning from the cold. He looked down at his frostbitten fingers with wide eyes.
"You can't hurt us," the speaker said. "Our robes are sanctified by rituals that were old when man still huddled in caves and cringed at the sound of thunder."
"I don't get any of this," Joe cried.
"This is all you need to know," the speaker said. "The hunger will consume your every waking moment. You will never be satisfied, never know warmth or comfort. You will roam and eat and lose your mind. And then one day, maybe 100 years from now, maybe 2, you will find your way back here. And our great-great-grandchildren will be waiting to put an end to your wandering."
Joe's stomach cramped and he doubled over. The speaker waved him away.
"Go now. There is only death for you here. But it will be a long time before you taste it. Go."
He wanted to attack and scream and argue, but he couldn't. He had to run, had to eat and eat.
and eat. He turned and fled into the woods, the wind at his back and the hunger in his soul. It was later, somewhere, somewhen. His thoughts were clouded and few and far between. Noises in the woods, light, hateful, fleeting flames. He crept between trees with his nose high and sniffing. People, two bigs and a small. People. He began to sprint. No sneak, no stealth. His teeth were on the small one before she could scream. The woman beat at him and he felt nothing. The man fired his weapon and he felt nothing. The child's flesh slid down his throat and he felt alive.
Green eyes and chili dogs. Written by Kevin David Anderson. Performed here by Jason Hill. Dale stared down at death. It wasn't the first time, and until his arteries finally petrified from a lifetime of truck stop cuisine, it wouldn't be the last. No more than 20, the girl lay on an autopsy table. Not the modern stainless steel variety, but a porcelain antique, with aluminum legs and a drain similar to the kind found in your average bathtub. Dale hovered over the grisly scene. For a few seconds he thought he might be dead too, a disembodied apparition. Then, the chili dogs he had wolfed down a few hours ago started doing unpleasant things to his insides. Even though he gazed down at the young woman, frozen in death during what he assumed was a premature autopsy, it was the chili dogs causing waves of nausea to ripple through him. Swallowing back the discomfort, he reached out for the poor girl. Despite a thick layer of makeup, her face had an innocent, endearing quality. He wanted very much to close those green eyes, give this one some peace, let the ferryman know that she was ready for the final journey. But his hand disappeared into her cheek, emerging out the other side. That's when Dale knew it was simply a dream. It made sense. Most everything was grainy, out of focus, black and white. Except for those eyes, those piercing green eyes. He took a deep breath and willed himself to consciousness. Damn it! Wake the hell up! He opened his eyes, then shut them, stunned by the glare of oncoming headlights. Bringing a hand over his brow, he opened his eyes slowly, like a child cautiously opening a closet door, unaware of what is inside. Hey! Welcome back, sunshine, a burly voice to his left said. Glancing over, Dale saw Earl in the driver's seat of the 18-wheeler. His friend and sometimes partner, unshaven, grinned at him with tobacco-stained teeth. Earl's gut would have done Santa Claus proud. It pressed up against the steering wheel, and his stretched-to-the-limit t-shirt could barely contain it. You, get enough beauty sleep, partner? Earl said. Dale yawned. Answering his own question, Earl said, Nope, didn't think so. Still look like 3-day-old roadkill. Dale heard a feminine laugh behind him. He turned around and looked behind his seat. A young woman bent forward, hand over her face, giggling. Oh, Dale, this here's Katie. Picked her up about 25 miles back. Katie offered her hand. Hi, I really appreciate the lift. Was out there for hours. Thought I'd have to sleep next to a cactus. Yeah. No problem, Dale said, taking her soft hand and gazing into her green eyes. Without letting go, he turned to Earl. Pull over. Earl frowned. What's wrong? Dale let go of her hand. Just pull over. Damn, if you need to drain the lizard, you put your knees together for a mile or two, Earl said. There's a chew and choke just up that... Now, Earl, Dale said. I gotta go now. Fine. Earl started a downshift. I swear you got the bladder of a 90-year-old woman. Hell, we ought to invest in some of them adult diapers so we can get a haul in on time. The tires rolled over gravel along the side of the highway, and before the rig had stopped, he opened his door. Dale jumped out of the cab, his boots touching down in the Utah desert. At midnight, it was pitch black outside, but the lights from the rig did a fair job of chasing away the darkness in the 10-yard perimeter. Dale walked straight for the point where the light faded into night, kicking up dust under his heavy footfall. He wasn't a fat man, but no one had ever accused him of missing a meal. Dale unzipped his fly and pissed into the breeze. What the hell is so damn urgent? Earl took position next to Dale. I swear, sometimes you're jumpier than bull's testicles on snipping day. Why'd you pick her up? You're not gonna give me that never pick up hitchhiker speech, are you? She can't be more than 110 pounds. Hell, I think we can take her. No, it's not that. It's just... What then? I just saw her. Earl shook his head. You couldn't have. You've been sawing logs since Barstow, buddy. Dale looked down, tapped, and sighed. No, I saw her in a dream. A grin curled on Earl's cheeks. Yeah, I dream about young things like that all the time. Once there was this, not that kind of dream, you cradle-robbing shithead. I mean, she was stripped naked and cut up like some high school dissection project. Earl lowered his voice, glancing back at the cab. Wait now, you saw her naked? Old man, will you please focus? I'm sorry. Earl zipped up. I think she's in danger or something. Dale sighed. It's just a feeling. Earl didn't respond for a few moments, distant crickets filling the silence. Oh, Lord, how I hate it when you get that feeling, Earl said. Well, if she stays with us, I suppose we can look after her. Yeah, I suppose. I hate this kind of crap. Earl leaned close to Dale. Did you get a chance to check out them headlights on her? Dale could picture them, but not at all like Earl probably was. In Dale's vision, her round, perfect breasts were no longer held in place by firm, uncut skin. They had flopped to either side of her chest and rested on blood-soaked porcelain. Jeez, Earl, you're old enough to be that girl's estranged, drunken, perverted, unshaven. Don't even invite him over for Thanksgiving no more, grandfather. Earl raised his voice. Unshaven? He turned his head so Dale could see his face in profile. This is trimmed and deliberate stubble. Earl ran a hand over his cheeks and double chin. I think it makes me look a bit like Ethan Hawke. What do you think? Dale felt vile rumblings deep in his belly, splashes of vomit burning his throat. Hell, I don't know, Earl. When Ethan is in his late 50s and puts on 70 pounds, I'll let you know. If he got moving, he might be able to quell the need to puke, so Dale started walking back to the truck. Oh, Jesus, Dale, can't you ever say anything nice to me? Dale stopped. Damn, Earl is needy. Without turning around, he said, You don't smell like god-awful shit today. How's that? Man, was that so hard? Swear to God, good buddy, getting a compliment out of you is like pulling Siegfried off a Roy. Yeah. Before Dale could take another step, he felt a massive belch ascend his esophagus. He tried to swallow it, but it burned like raw jalapenos. He instinctively bent forward, just in time to avoid puking on his boots. Earl placed a hand on his heaving back. You see, that's why you're not supposed to eat more than one of them chili dogs in that place. Hell, even the waitress said so. Katie yelled from the cab, Is he all right? Oh, yeah, Earl said. If puking your guts out ever becomes an Olympic event, well, My friend here will win that gold medal faster than you can say, "Oh, what's that smell?" Feeling a great deal better and 10 pounds lighter, Dale wiped his mouth. "Well, that was fun," Dale said. "If you're all done redecorating Utah, I suggest we get this show back on the road." Dale held out his hand. "I'll drive." Earl pulled out the keys. "All right, but be gentle with her this time. My rig's a Peterbilt lady, unlike that Mac whore you tool around in." Earl was baiting him into another smack-talking session over whose truck was superior, but he wasn't in the mood. His throat burned like hell. Every breath he took reeked of chili, and there was a girl in the cab he could easily picture with her chest cracked open. He just wanted this run to be over. Dale sparked the engine back to life while Earl let out a long belch. The unwelcome odor of chili filled the cab. Earl rubbed his belly and made a sour face. "How many of those chili dogs did you have?" "Just one," Earl said. "Well," Dale said, pulling back out onto Interstate 15, "it's probably going to take a little longer." "No, sir." Earl shook his head. "I ain't puking. Only the girls puke. No offense to either of you." Katie chuckled behind them. "So, where are you headed, Katie?" Dale asked. "Back home," she said. "Salt Lake City." Christ, Dale thought. Few places on the planet gave Dale the willies, but Salt Lake City always made his hair stand on end. Even in broad daylight, the city just seemed off-kilter. All the streets spun out from the cathedral like spires in a web, trying to snare a meal for some unseen spidery god.
"So, do you guys drive together all the time?" Katie asked. "I mean, I've seen truckers ride together before, but it's usually man and wife team."
"Oh, unless you guys are..." Detecting apprehension in her voice, Dale said, "Are what?"
"Well, I don't judge or anything." Her voice quivered. "And not that there's anything wrong with that."
Dale finally got her meaning. It must have hit Earl at the same time because they both responded with a deep and masculine, "No!" "God, no," Dale continued. In the rearview mirror, Dale saw Katie wave her hands as she said,
"Like I said, not judging."
Earl laughed, then belched. Dale fanned the smell of regurgitated chili with his hand. "Will you stick a cork in it, brother? Jeez." Earl rubbed his belly. "Better out than in." He turned around. "You see, Katie, we're just doing a double haul. Did you notice we got 2 trailers hooked together?"
Yeah,"
Katie said.
"The one on the end is his."
Earl gestured to Dale.
"Sometimes cargo needs to get from LA to Chicago in an awful hurry. Just one driver, that could take nearly 3 days if a driver is obeying the law. 2 drivers, Dale and I can go straight on through cutting the time in half."
"Get there faster," Katie said.
"And pays triple."
Earl grinned. The headlights lit up a sign, which Dale squinted to read. Salt Lake City, 12 miles. Earl leaned toward Dale.
"She thought you and I were,
Yeah, I got it, Earl," Dale snapped.
Earl sat back up straight. "If I swung that way, I could get someone prettier than you, I think."
He turned to face Katie.
"Don't you think I could get someone prettier than them?"
Katie laughed.
"I don't know, maybe."
"What do you think of this stubble?" Earl said. "Think I'll look a bit like that Ethan Hawke?"
"Oh, yeah, a bit,"
Katie said. Earl turned toward Dale.
"Told you."
Good God, Dale thought. Dale contemplated driving into a set of oncoming lights. "So, Katie," he said, catching her gaze in the rearview mirror, "what brings y'all home?"
"Oh,"
she slumped back into her seat.
"My mom called me. Wants me to help with Billy, my younger brother."
"He's sick?" Dale asked.
"No, just acting funny."
Earl turned around.
"Funny how?"
"Ever since he graduated from high school, a couple months back, he just sleeps all day."
"Oh, hell," Earl said. "That's just being lazy. Post-graduation syndrome."
Oh, it's not just that, Katie continued. Mom said he never eats anymore. He's turned pale and thin. And when he does go out, it's only ever after dark.
A chill crawled up Dale's spine. He glanced over at Earl, who was looking back at him. Dale could tell they were thinking the same thing.
Mom says his whole personality's changed, like he's a different person. And he has this new group of friends Mom's never seen before.
Katie paused. Dale met her gaze in the mirror. The luster of her green eyes faded. Katie shrugged.
I don't know. Mom thinks that I can talk some sense into him. We used to be close.
Mentally, Dale kicked himself. There was, in fact, a silver cross in the glove box of his truck, kept for just such an emergency. But they weren't in his truck. They were in Earl's. Dale had no idea what implements Earl kept on hand beyond a Bowie knife. One as big as a machete, but still. Katie rested her elbows in the back of their seats.
Hey, listen. You guys have been real nice to me. I'm sure my mom wouldn't mind if you wanted to come in for a minute. Use the facilities, grab a bite to eat.
Earl let go with another belch, patting his stomach.
Nothing to eat, thank you, but I could certainly use a quick shower.
Ah, sure,
Katie said, turning toward Dale.
How about you?
Dale sighed, wishing he were still asleep.
Well, how about it?
Earl said. Sure, why not? Dale said, putting on the turn signal. He eased the rig over, taking the first exit into Salt Lake City. A few minutes later, they parked in a faintly lit suburban street. The houses were big, 2 and 3 stories, and even in the night, Dale could see finely manicured landscaping. Katie hopped down.
Just let me go in first and say hi, then I'll wave you in, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Earl closed the cab door, turning to Dale. He lowered his voice.
You, think we should, let her go in alone?
I think her story has already been written, my friend.
Huh?
Dale shook his head. Never mind. They both watched silently as Katie crossed the street and followed the walk to the 2-story Victorian. The dark porch seemed to swallow her petite form. She had been out of sight for a full minute before either of them spoke.
How long we gonna sit here?
Earl rubbed a hand over his stubble. Dale looked up the street. The ghost-white steeples of the Mormon temple rose like watchtowers, heaping a vigil on its flock. The looming spires added to Dale's discomfort, reminding him that there were a million places he'd rather be about now. Guess that's long enough. He turned to Earl. What you got? Earl reached under the seat and pulled out a heavy vinyl carrying case rolled up like a sleeping bag. As Earl unfurled it, Dale was pleasantly surprised to see that Earl was better prepared than he'd imagined. Throwing knives, a handgun, bullets, some silver, some not, several sets of brass knuckles. All were tucked into form-fitting pouches. I'll take the .38, Dale said, removing the revolver. He flipped open the carousel, checking to see if it was loaded. It was. As he tucked the gun in the small of his back behind his belt, Earl pulled out 2 throwing knives and shoved them in his back pocket. He reached under the seat again and came up with a Bowie knife cradled in both hands. Dale smiled as he read the large inscription on the blade. Betsy.
You ready to go to work, old girl?
Earl said to his knife. Dale slapped Earl's arm. Come on, old man. As they crossed the street, Earl let go another chili-laced burp. Dale frowned at him. More stealth, less belching. Earl feigned a salute and then moved up the walk. The wooden porch creaked under their considerable weight. In the stillness of the night, it seemed thunderous. Dale put his hand on the door. It was ajar. He took a deep breath and pushed. The door swung inward, and they both stared for a moment. There were only 2 sources of light in the house. One came from upstairs, very faint, distant, probably escaping from underneath a closed door. The other was bright and glaring. Dale got the impression that it was a light bulb hanging free with no lampshade to soften the glow. It shone upward, and although Dale couldn't see the source, it was apparently coming from a cellar. Gesturing with Betsy, Earl said, "Age before beauty." Dale moved inside. His boots made no sound as he stepped onto a thick throw rug. Following his instincts, he headed toward the cellar, motioning Earl to follow. The cellar light at the end of the wide hall illuminated family photos on the wall. Dale recognized images of Katie with someone he assumed was her younger brother. The siblings were pictured at different moments in their lives: elementary school, soccer team pictures, proms. As he moved down the hall, taking in the images was like watching them grow up. When Dale reached the cellar entrance, he glanced back at Earl before he started his descent. He had no doubt that Earl would always be there, covering his back, ready to take on whatever horror awaited them. But he still felt the need to check. They both took a deep breath, and then they descended. Midway, Dale hunched to get a better view and caught sight of 4 aluminum table legs sitting dead center on the cement floor. With one more step, he saw the white porcelain of the autopsy table. He paused for a moment and closed his eyes.
You okay?
Earl put a hand on Dale's shoulder. Dale nodded, swallowed hard, and opened his eyes. Stepping onto the cellar floor, each moved to opposite sides of the porcelain table. They stared down at Katie and her green eyes.
Oh, sweet Jesus.
Earl wiped his brow. Dale knew this is what they would find, but a small part of him, now crumbling into disappointment, wanted to be surprised. She looked cold, and he wanted to cover her somehow. But her days of feeling cold were long gone.
I don't get it,
Earl said.
This couldn't have happened in 5 goddamn minutes. This took hours to do.
Dale nodded. A no.
And if she's been lying here...
Earl paused, swallowing.
Who the hell did we get in my rig?
Dale just shrugged. Earl shuddered as if a ghost had just moved through him.
How in the hell does this creepy shit always find us? I mean, it's not like we go looking for it.
Dale examined the 2 small puncture wounds in Katie's neck. Very round and deep. We're just lucky that way, I guess.
So what now?
Earl said.
Get out of here? Make an anonymous call to Johnny Law?
Dale shook his head. Katie didn't bring us here to just find her.
I'm afraid you were going to say that.
Earl sighed.
So, what's the plan?
We check the rest of the house. We don't find nothing, then we wait.
Great,
Earl said.
I always want to tip...
They both jumped as an old rotary phone mounted on the wall began to ring. Dale pointed the .38 at the phone, his finger wrapped tightly around the trigger guard. Upstairs, at least 4 other phones were ringing in unison, some with electronic bleeps, others with traditional rings. After the 4th ring, Earl said,
Are you gonna shoot the phone?
Dale rolled his eyes and lowered his pistol.
You want I should get that? It might be our bad guy calling to say hey.
Earl grinned. Before Dale could respond, the ringing stopped. It didn't stop because the caller had given up, terminating the connection. It stopped ringing because someone answered it. Dale and Earl exchanged silent, wide-eyed glances. Someone upstairs, possibly on the 2nd floor, had picked up. And Dale could just make out a male voice filtering down through the still house.
No, I was just getting a little rest,
the voice said.
I can't wait to be with you again, my beloved.
Dale heard feet slap down above as if someone was getting out of bed. Or possibly getting out of a coffin.
Yes, it did take a long time,
the voice continued.
Mother too, but it was well worth it. They just tasted divine, like black roses harvested from the soil of a graveyard.
Heavy steps moved above. The footfalls began descending and the voices grew louder.
You did?
The voice sounded excited.
Oh, how delicious.
Dale motioned for Earl to take position under the stairs on the right. Dale stood to the left. The voice was now at the top of the cellar stairs. The words were crystal clear.
until we are together again, my dark princess. For I am but only half a demon without you. Dale had the nauseating feeling of listening to a horror romance novel on tape, complete with cheesy goth dialogue. Worst of all, he was almost sure what the creep would say next, and he cringed at the thought. Don't say it, please, don't say it. You complete me. The voice said at the top of the cellar stairs. God, I can't wait to kill this sumbitch. Dale heard the soft bleep of a cordless phone being switched off. Then heavy footsteps shook the wooden stairs as the man descended. Dale pressed himself against the wall, sucking in his gut. Earl did the same with little effect. A dark figure stepped down onto the cellar floor, a black silk cape trailing behind him. Shoulder-length hair the color of midnight swayed with the creature's movement as it approached Katie's still body. He reached out a bony hand and caressed her dead cheek. We still have so much more to do, my sweet sister. The monster was Katie's younger brother, Billy. He moved to the other side of the table, his ebony eyes aimed at Katie's dead green ones. We've only just begun this journey, you and I. Together we will explore passions only dreamt of. Earl interrupted the bastard's monologue with a loud, unrestrained belch. He looked over at Dale and said, I'm sorry. The dark figure stood erect, about 5¼ feet tall. Dale registered a hint of surprise on the creature's face. Billy wore a dark pinstriped vest with a tuxedo-style collar. Blood-red jewels dangled from a choker around a milky white neck streaked with veins. Billy raised his arms dramatically, flinging the cape off his shoulders. He bared 1-inch fangs that gleamed ivory under the naked light bulb. Jeez, Dale thought. Somebody's got Dracula envy. Foolish mortals, Billy said. Rushing down into a dark lair, knowing not what you will find. Yeah, Dale said. We're kinda stupid that way. Billy, now a bloodlusting thing, stepped away from the table. Do you know in whose presence you are in? Enlighten us. Earl brought up the knife. Billy narrowed his gaze, and his black pupils were just visible between slits of pale skin. He tilted his head down, revealing a Bela Lugosi-style hairline. I am a god of death. Dale chuckled. You mock me, mortal. Sorry, Dale said. I just thought that if and ever I met a god, he'd be, well, you know. Dale looked at Earl. Well, help me out, buddy. Taller, Earl said, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, Dale agreed, taking aim with a .38. Taller. Billy hoisted his arms like a Shakespearean thespian demanding the audience's attention. Like the night I am forever, long after your bodies have been reclaimed by the cold earth, I will continue in the darkness, forever employed by death, draining the living from my unending journey through time. I am eternal. I am the night. I am forever. Dale shot Mr. Forever through the forehead. Billy fell back against the wall and slid downward. Like a slug, he left a thick, pulpy trail. Astonishment was chiseled on his dead features. Earl moved fast for a man his size, approaching Billy's body. He knelt down and looked as if he were going to poke the body with Betsy. Easy, Earl. Dale kept the pistol trained on Billy's unmoving chest. That ain't always the end of 'em. Careful is my middle name. Earl brushed the blade across Billy's cheek. Dale lowered the gun. Your middle name is Marion. Now, I told you that was confident. What the hell? Earl rotated the blade, revealing a dull white substance on its edge. A flesh-colored spot had appeared where Earl had scraped the knife. Earl rubbed his thumb across Billy's neck, smearing the stenciled-on veins. His thumb glistened with makeup. Y'all gotta be kidding me. Earl opened the dead boy's mouth. He yanked out one of the fangs. Holding up the dislodged prosthetic tooth, he shook his head. You crazy sumbitch. He turned to Dale. What the hell is wrong with kids today? Dale sighed,
putting the pistol back in his belt. Earl stood and tossed the porcelain fang onto Billy's chest.
I mean, why can't they just raid their parents' liquor cabinet and smoke pot like we did?
Dale moved forward, looking down at Katie's green eyes. They were the prettiest shade of forest green he had ever seen.
I swear, Dale, video games, iPods, reality TV, it's rotting their little brains.
Earl's voice rose.
Get up, you son of a bitch. It's my turn to kill you.
You about through? Earl rubbed his forehead.
Yeah.
He joined Dale at the table.
Sure was a sweet thing.
Dale said, an angel if ever there was one. He closed her eyes with his fingers. Sleep now, child. Earl crossed his hands over his belly and both men stood silent, only the sound of their breathing between them. The sound of the front door being closed echoed upstairs. Dale froze. Footsteps moved over the ceiling, heading for the cellar stairs. Dale and Earl turned to face the door. Within moments, a set of long female legs encased in thigh-high patent leather boots came into view. They seemed a bit unsteady, as if the owner was carrying something, making the journey down the steps awkward. When the woman reached the bottom step, she froze, surprise showing through a pound of goth-styled makeup. She held a bundle 2 feet long, limp and unmoving. It was a child. Its bright pink Dora the Explorer pajamas contrasted sharply with the woman's vampira outfit.
Well, I'll be damned, Earl said. There's a missus, son bitch.
Without a word, the woman dropped the child. Dale lurched forward, arms outstretched. He missed the child's body but caught her head, keeping it from hitting the cement floor. The woman scrambled up the stairs. Dale pulled the girl to his chest as he felt something pass over his head, nicking his hair. One of Earl's throwing knives stuck in the thick black heel of Vampira's boot. The blade didn't slow her down. Earl grimaced apologetically.
Get that child-stealing bitch,
Dale yelled. Earl rushed past Dale and mounted the stairs.
Look out, wide load coming through.
Dale held the child out in front of him.
Please don't be dead.
He placed a thick finger on the small neck, holding his breath. The child was breathing, and he felt a healthy pulse in her neck. He breathed with relief. Thank you. He leaned in and caught the familiar scent of chloroform.
Goddamn sons of bitches.
The child stirred. He brushed her fine auburn locks away from her eyes and stood up. You just get some rest, sweetie. Ain't nothing gonna hurt you now. Dale looked back at Katie, understanding why she had brought them here. You done real good, girl, real good. Then he headed up the steps. In the living room, Dale found a love seat close to the entryway. He gently deposited the sleeping child and pulled an Afghan over her. I need to go help Uncle Earl, but I'll be back, he whispered. Dale hurried through the open front door. He took out the pistol, looking up and down the street for any sign of Earl or Vampira. On the last porch step, he felt something slick under his boot. Both feet went out from under him. He braced for impact. Ass first, he hit the brick walkway. God damn it! Dale rolled off one cheek, the stench of chili assaulting his nostrils.
Oh, hell, Dale, I'm sorry.
Earl strolled across the lawn.
What did I slip on?
Earl stood over him, rubbing his belly.
Come up them basement steps just so darn fast it jarred something loose. That chili dog just did a Mount St. Helens on me.
Dale realized what he was sitting in.
Oh, man.
He sat back down.
Well, did you get her at least?
Earl shook his head.
Sorry, buddy. 20 years ago, maybe.
He slapped his gut.
This here body was built by Bud.
Damn it, Earl.
Hey, man, I ain't no Mark Spitz or nothing.
Dale furrowed his brow.
What? You know, the Olympic running guy.
Mark Spitz was a swimmer, you idiot.
Oh.
Earl scratched his head.
Who am I thinking of? Olympics fast-running fella.
I have no idea. Dale thrust his hand up at Earl. Earl grasped Dale's hand and pulled him up. There was a wet sound as Dale's butt departed from the walk. Dale stood, slapping regurgitated chili dog off his ass. Exactly why am I friends with you?
Because I'm so damn pretty.
Earl grinned. But looking back at the house, his expression turned solemn. Is the, little one... I mean... Is she... No, Dale said. Just sleeping. Chloroform. Earl let out a long breath.
Well, what now? Can't call local cops. We'd be here for the next few days trying to reckon all this.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to explaining how we come to be here neither.
Well, what then?
Dale thought for a moment. Well, I still know a few folks at the FBI. One I know could maybe keep my report of what went on here anonymous. At least the info would get filtered down to the locals.
Well, what about little one? Can't leave her here.
Dale gazed out across the yard, seeing the enormous white spires in the distance. I got an idea.
FBI?
Earl slapped his belly.
I know you don't like to talk about it, but one day you're going to have to tell me more about this life you had before we met.
Dale slapped Earl's back. Now, you know my life didn't really begin till I met you. He moved up the steps.
As much as I appreciate all the sweet talk,
Earl said,
I know you're just trying to change the subject. Again.
After depositing the sleeping child on the top step of the temple, Dale looked back only once. When security guards swarmed around the bundle, he said a silent goodbye. Dale made his way to where Earl waited in the truck, engine humming. He hopped into the cab.
Everything go all right?
Earl said. Just fine. Earl turned the lights on as the truck began to roll forward.
If I might make a personal observation, good buddy.
Dale buckled up, sighing.
If you must. For a man as religiously void as yourself, that was a very spiritually insightful thing you just done.
Dale folded his arms and sank into his seat.
Will you please just get me the hell out of Utah? Suits me just fine. And there's this all-night diner on the other side of the state line. Fries up the best...
You just puked, Dale said, looking at Earl in amazement. Earl patted his belly.
Well, I know. Now I got all this room, you see.
Dale shook his head, tuning out Earl's annoying drone. He wanted so badly to go to sleep. He wanted so badly for this run to be over. Shutting his eyes, he attempted to will himself unconscious. It didn't work. He gazed out his window and imagined for a moment that he saw green eyes dimly reflected in the glass. Good night, he said to himself. Good night, Katie.
Sebastian's hand adjusted on the gun. His palms were sweating. A year ago, he wouldn't have even imagined things like this were real. A year ago, the whole world seemed different. It was different. Horrors like the thing in front of him were the stuff of movies, tales told to frighten people on a night just like tonight. His eyes flicked to the window as the gleeful sounds of laughing children and parents commanding them to slow down drifted up from the street below. Then he looked back at the person in front of him, the person that was staring at him, their face a mask of terror as their fingers traced the blank wall behind them, all too aware they had nowhere to go. The person that looked just like him. "It's over," Sebastian said. It wasn't the fact that the frightened thing before him wore his face that led Sebastian to this point. It was the unspeakable horrors it committed while doing it. The children, those poor children. Sebastian twitched, the images of their remains flashing like a macabre slideshow behind his eyes. He jabbed the gun aggressively towards his living reflection. "You're not leaving this room." The creature stopped its nervous fidgeting then and glared at him. "You mean you're not leaving this room?" it said through his own lips, pulled back into a sneer. It started to change then, its flesh stretching and pulling like it was made of putty. Sebastian watched with disgust as his own face disfigured itself, his eyes bulging, ears falling away, hair dropping out in clumps and cascading to the floor. "Why don't you just pull the trigger?" a voice said from Sebastian's right. He turned and stared at the man who had spoken, the man who had taken this surreal journey into madness with him, Elliot. "That thing took my Elsa. You saw what it did to her. Shoot it!" "It's not that easy to shoot yourself in the face," Sebastian barked. He twisted the gun in his hand and offered it to Elliot handle first. "You do it." When he looked back at the thing that wore his face, it was no longer his own reflection looking back. The person that raised its hands to them defensively was now Elliot's mirror image. "I can pick someone new," the thing said. "Walk past a camera, look right into it, give hard evidence to the police that you're innocent. If I die, though, they'll go on believing you a monster, a cannibal." It laughed nervously. "The court of public opinion already does," Sebastian said. A wolf howled loudly from outside as a trapdoor banged open and a girl shrieked in terror. Sebastian jumped as the sound was followed by laughter and the trampling sound of running feet. But no one has died in this city yet. These children are safe and they're going to stay that way. "Do it!" Sebastian glanced over at Elliot. "Elliot, do it!" Elliot pounded his palm against his head. "I just keep seeing my Elsa. What it did to her. What it left of her. I keep thinking of the way she must have suffered, and I don't want to just kill this thing. I don't want it to get off that easily. I want it to suffer like Elsa suffered. The head or the heart, it's the only way," Sebastian said. "If you fail to kill it and this thing gets away, it will change, blend in, and disappear until next Halloween when it comes back out to feed again. More children will die. You know this." Elliot violently smacked himself in the head again. The thing across from them was just watching intently through its own version of Elliot's eyes. "I do know that," Elliot said, thrusting the gun out towards the thing that wore his face. "I do know that. But just because we have to shoot it in the head or the heart doesn't mean we can't shoot it in the arms and legs first." The false Elliot's eyes widened as the muzzle flashed. It dove forward, but the bullet hit it in the shoulder and spun its body around. Blue blood sprayed the wall and the thing shrieked, a shrill sound that wasn't human in nature, a sound that would be dismissed as part of the holiday atmosphere. Elliot's doppelganger's face twitched and spasmed. Then the flesh bubbled and spilled like liquid only to be sucked back towards the off-white bones that showed through in its absence. The shoulder and arm reacted the same, tearing right through the shirt that housed it and reaching towards the ceiling like a fleshy serpent. The snake took on Sebastian's face for a moment and stared at him before it withdrew and was vacuumed back to the waiting bones. The bullet fell from the liquid flesh to jingle on the floor. Then it was little Elsa that stood before them, intact and whole, as she was before the monster got to her. "Daddy," she pleaded. "It's not her," Sebastian said. "You know it's not her." Elliot screamed in agony and fury as the little girl across from them smiled. "Give it to me. I'll do it. I can do it," Sebastian said, reaching for the gun. Elliot screamed again but held the gun firmly. Sebastian tried to wrestle it away from him before it was too late. Then the Elsa look-alike hissed and bared its teeth, rough and stained with the blood of innocence like the face it now wore. It shot past them and dove headfirst out the window. "No!" Sebastian screamed. He pulled away from Elliot and ran to the window in time to see the thing smack the pavement below. Costumed teens walking by yelled in fright and then laughed at themselves when the child got up. They looked up at Sebastian staring down from the window above and called out, "Cool effects, bro!" Sebastian watched in horror as the teens moseyed away and the thing behind them that had been Elsa morphed, stretched, and changed to mimic one of them flawlessly. Sebastian sucked in a breath when he noticed the bone. It was broken and jagged and jutted from the thing's leg. "Come on!" Sebastian shouted to Elliot as he pulled himself away from the window. "It's hurt. We can still catch it before it grabs any of the kids out there." He glanced at Elliot, who was still clutching the gun and trembling with tears rolling from his eyes to wet his stubbled face. He jammed an index finger in his mouth and bit down on the knuckle, growling through his teeth as Sebastian stood by watching. I couldn't shoot my Elsa after everything she'd already been through. I couldn't. That fucking thing knew that. We need to make sure no other children end up like Elsa, Sebastian said. This is why you came with me, Elliot. You saw that there was two of me, that there was something terrible at work here. You wanted to kill it, to make sure no other children suffered like yours did. Focus on that, because every second we waste, that thing gets further out of reach. Elliot nodded. He took a deep breath and wiped his eyes. Go, he said. I'm with you. Go. Together they ran down the stairs and out the door into the chaos of the booming Halloween night. They stopped and scanned the street. There were running teens, little kids with candy bags, and costumed parents everywhere. Sebastian realized that the thing must have changed again because the teen he saw it become wasn't among the crowd. It could be anyone, Elliot said, stuffing the gun in his jacket pocket. Watch the legs, Sebastian said. There's a broken bone. I don't think it will right itself with the changes. I think it's truly injured. I hope it hurts, Elliot said bitterly. I hope it hurts like hell. Me too, Sebastian admitted. He could feel someone staring at him. Looking to his left, he saw one of the parents, the father of a miniature Frankenstein, eyeing him with curiosity. Sebastian flashed a quick smile and gave a friendly wave, then turned away. He realized they might recognize him from the news, and he wanted to seem as non-threatening as possible. If he got made as the child killer from TV, it would ruin everything. Sebastian no longer cared if he was thrown in jail or beaten to death or both, but he wanted to make sure that it didn't happen until the real killer was dead. It was the only thing that mattered anymore. He couldn't trust Elliot to do it on his own. He was too unpredictable. Sebastian looked around for a disguise that would help him go unnoticed. On the ground by a tree, he spotted a hard plastic witch mask with an elastic strap. He hurried over and scooped it up. Sebastian frowned when he saw that it was discarded because it had cracked. Still, it was better than nothing. He pulled the elastic strap over his head and grumbled when the broken plastic pinched the skin of his face. He adjusted it, only to be scratched by the broken mask. Cussing quietly, he looked back at the stranger who was now holding his child close to him, and he waved again before quickly moving along to get lost in the crowd just like the man he was hunting. Was it even a man? He didn't give a damn what it was. It was evil and needed to die. Elliot caught up with him and said, "Which is a good look for you. Someone was bound to recognize you. Your face has been plastered all over the television for days, even if it wasn't you wearing it." "I know," Sebastian said as he scanned the crowd through the small eye holes in the broken mask. "I was so focused on catching the monster that I stopped thinking about getting caught myself. It was careless and stupid. We need to be smarter if we're going to win. I don't see any jutting leg bones. Damn thing could be anywhere." "It's here," Sebastian said with certainty. He just wished he knew where, what face it was wearing, what costume. Would it bother with a mask? Its very face was a mask. Watch the children. It's bound to be hungry. It might try to grab one. If it does, we can nab it. Do people actually say nab? It seems like such an unnatural word. "Seriously?" Sebastian glared at him through the broken witch mask. Elliot shrugged. "When the monster took Elsa, it took everything. My heart and soul are gone. If I'm going to stay sane long enough to finish this, I need to have conversation, humor, connection, you know?" "Sorry," Sebastian said, realizing too late that Elliot couldn't see his frown through the mask. A scream rang out in the distance, and both Sebastian and Elliot whirled around to look in that direction. When they did, a horde of laughing teens went running past them. Sebastian sighed and turned back. When he did, he saw one of the teens in the group, a boy in a skull mask, look back at him with recognition. "You see that?" Elliot said from beside him. "Has to be him, right?" "I don't know," Sebastian admitted. "They were moving fast. I didn't see any leg injury. Maybe it healed." "Maybe." Sebastian wished he knew more about the thing they were chasing. He wished he knew the rules, what it could do and couldn't, what they were truly up against. He knew that the body could change at will, the flesh could mold to become what it wanted. He and Elliot agreed that they needed to destroy the brain or the heart to take it down, but now that he thought about it, it was all just theory. They didn't truly know anything. They didn't even know if the damn thing had a heart or a brain. Maybe it was just full of blue blood and maggots. Anything was possible. He knew that the moment he saw someone else wearing his face. Sebastian watched Elliot run off in pursuit of the teen in the skull mask. He didn't hurry to follow. Something about it just didn't sit right with him. The shapeshifter was full of tricks. Its entire existence was a trick. He turned back to view the crowd again, then kicked himself when he realized that Elliot still had the gun. He still didn't go after his partner. Gun or no gun, he had to find this thing and stop it, make sure it didn't hurt anyone else. He adjusted his mask and moved into the middle of the street to stand among the passing crowd, his gaze dancing over all of them, flickering from person to person, searching for any sign of the monster hiding in plain sight. Sebastian didn't know why the thing chose him or when. It could have been completely random. Perhaps they just passed each other in a 7-Eleven and Sebastian was just unlucky enough to be picked. Maybe he had done something to piss it off, cut it off on the highway, or took its parking space at the mall. He often thought through his entire life, all the odd moments, the times people were angry or aggressive with him, the times he hurt someone's feelings, intentional or not. Any one of them could have been him, could have been it. The thing had probably gone through countless faces by now. It blended in. Maybe it even lived a normal life as someone's child. Maybe Sebastian had pissed it off on the playground, a grudge that would never die. Maybe he dated the girl the thing had a crush on in high school. It literally could have been anything, and it was enough to drive him insane incessantly thinking about it. As his eyes moved over the costumed partygoers, behind them, he relived the moment he had found out he had been chosen as the face of evil. It was so strange, surreal. Sebastian had been at a gas station close to his house that he had used on an almost daily basis. The card reader was down and there was a sign to pay inside. Sighing, he walked across the lot, frustrated that he was going to be late for work. When he got inside, he grabbed a Mountain Dew for a caffeine boost and stood in the slow-moving line. He was fidgeting and trying not to think about the time, his foot tapping as he silently begged the line to move so he could go. "Hey, that's him," some guy in a hoodie with a black eye yelled, pointing right at him. It seemed to Sebastian to be such a strange thing to say, so he repeated it. "That's him?" "Son of a bitch!" Someone else practically snarled at him. Sebastian looked at them with confusion. "Me?" "Get him!" yelled a haggard woman in a crop top that had the nerve to bring a cigarette with her into the gas station. "Why?" Sebastian asked quietly, then louder when they closed in and he realized that they meant it. He ran out the door, bell jingling behind him, the angry mob in hot pursuit. When he got to his car and slammed the door, the gas station clerk banged into it and pounded on his window. Sebastian was shaking as he fumbled with the keys. He had no idea what was happening or why. "Leave me alone!" he screamed. "You're all insane!" When he drove away, he realized he wasn't going to get far since he didn't actually get the gas he went there for. He also realized that in his fear for his life, he had accidentally stolen the Mountain Dew. He would have gone back and paid for it if he didn't believe they would rip him to pieces for doing so. Sebastian couldn't figure out what was going on. He drove to work, deciding to get gas later. When he entered, the woman at the front desk looked at him like he was wielding an axe. She trembled and took out her phone. "Are you serious?" Jack said to him. Jack and Sebastian had worked together for the better part of a decade. They even hung out outside of work from time to time. "Serious?" Sebastian questioned. "You're just gonna show up here?" Jack asked harshly. "It's all over the news, you freak. We know what you've done." Someone came charging at him, madness and violence written all over them. Sebastian turned and ran. "What have I done?" he said out loud as he ran. "Murderer!" a woman screamed before throwing her fountain drink at him. It crashed into the car door as he slammed it shut after clambering in. As Sebastian drove away, he heard the sirens. He knew he couldn't go home. They would be looking for him there even if he had no idea why. He couldn't go anywhere he normally went, anywhere they would expect him to go. They would be looking for his car as well, probably already had an APB on it. He was almost out of gas anyway. Sebastian drove onto the parkway and ditched the car, rolling it off on an embankment. He stuck to the hiking trails, terrified and confused. He stole a backpack from some campers and put on clothes and a hat that he would never have worn before. He had grown a beard and hoped it would be enough. When Sebastian rejoined society, it was for food. He was standing in line when he saw the TV, the news report, the tales of the terrible things done to those children, and the picture of the killer. The picture of him. Sebastian felt nauseous. He ran to the bathroom and vomited what little he had had to eat in the past few days. The thing that everyone thought he did was the worst thing he could ever imagine, and the worst part was he saw the report himself, the surveillance footage, the screenshot, and it was definitely him. He didn't understand how it was possible. He knew it wasn't him. It couldn't be him. He didn't have any blackouts or lost time. He wasn't capable of violence, certainly not violence upon children, but no one was going to believe that. Why would they? The TV was showing them all his face and saying he did it. They were giving horrible, sickening details. If Sebastian didn't know better, he would chase him down with a pitchfork too. Somehow, for some reason, someone had set him up, and he needed to know who, to know why they chose him, what he had done. His life was over. He was never going to get it back. He needed to understand why. It was that need to understand that drove him to this very moment where he stared at trick-or-treaters through a broken witch mask, prepared to commit the type of violence they all already believed him capable of. When he had left the gas station, Sebastian knew he had to get away, and he had to be careful, consider every single move he made, or he was going to get caught and killed before he could discover the truth. The man who had only accidentally stolen a Mountain Dew when people were attacking him now stole a car and another car's license plates to put on it. He used a library computer to find out everything he could about the crimes he supposedly committed. The details sent him running back to the bathroom. He found some pictures online and wished he didn't. How anyone could do that to a child was beyond his comprehension. How anyone could think him capable of such atrocities. Sebastian tried to find out if anything like this had happened before and discovered that it had, with a different killer each time. It was always at Halloween, children stolen and eaten like a lamb that a wolf had gotten a hold of. Copycats of the original that went all the way back to 1978. Sebastian knew it was more, though. It was something else, because he knew that he didn't do this, but there was no denying that the still frames and footage was of him. It could be a deep fake, but that technology was pretty new. What if none of the people caught and sentenced to death had committed the crimes? They weren't using deep fakes in 1978. What the hell was going on then? Sebastian realized that the killer was on the move, going from city to city, state to state, leaving open carcasses in their wake. It helped him to realize where it was going to go next. He traced his finger across the map on the screen, following their path. The police could do the same thing, but they were looking for him, and he had been seen here. He had to hunt the killer while the whole world hunted for him. It shouldn't be hard to find him. He was looking for himself. Sebastian finally did find the thing when it found Elsa. He got to see up close and personal what it did to its victims then, to its food. He had never seen so much blood and from someone so small. It was the sheer shock of it that kept the bile down. Sebastian chased it, chased himself, or the demon or whatever that thing was that wore his face and looked up at him over the mutilated body, blood running in rivers from the corners of its mouth. It chewed violently like it didn't have the teeth for it. Sebastian tried to shoot it. It was bizarre, like a bad dream, shooting at yourself. He missed, and to this moment wondered if it had truly been an accident, even after the terrible things he witnessed. Elliot was a wild man. He thought there was some kind of alien invasion, a clone army that massacred his daughter. He joined the hunt, trying to kill both the Sebastians, screaming like an animal. It was primal, agonizing grief turned into rage. Sebastian understood him and accepted that he might die there that day. He didn't give up the chase for the other him. even as the heartbroken father slashed at him with a kitchen knife and bellowed promises of murder. Sebastian was forced to flee when the police came. He watched from the trees as the copy of him changed to look identical to one of the officers at the scene. It evaded Elliot and walked right by everyone. Elliot had seen it change too, and as Sebastian listened from the trees, he tried to tell the other cops that one of them wasn't real, that there was an imposter among them, but he just sounded like a crazy person. They chalked it up to grief. They tried to take him to the hospital to help him deal with the trauma, but he refused to go. They threatened to take him by force, and the sickened father sobered quickly. "I'll go myself when I'm ready," he told them. "For now, I just need to be here. Please, I need to be here." Sebastian waited until the cops were long gone before he came out of hiding, only to discover that Elliot was waiting on him, butcher knife in hand. Sebastian raised his arms defensively. "I tried to stop it, to kill it. You saw me. You saw change into the cop. I know you did. It stole your daughter and it stole my face, and with it, my entire life. I've got nothing left." "Then let's go," Elliot said, his eyes blazing with the fire of vengeance. "Let's kill it. I want it to suffer, to feel pain as terrible as the pain it left me with. Help me do it." They tracked it for days, caught up to it twice, and still had yet to bring it down. Judging by what Sebastian had read, the killings happened the whole week leading up to Halloween, the final murders being Halloween night. That meant if they didn't find this thing tonight, they would have to wait another year. Sebastian didn't know if he could evade the authorities that long. He would end up on death row just like the people before him, people whose lives this thing stole in order to continue feeding itself gluttonously on the meat of the innocent. Sebastian couldn't stand the thought. He couldn't let it get away again. So many years, so many children, so many lives ruined. No, it had to end tonight. Sebastian was still in his mind, following the walking families and running kids, listening to the screams of terror and the laughter of people having fun getting scared, when something caught his attention. A 3-foot-tall Spider-Man was yelling that someone stole his candy. When Sebastian looked that way, he saw a bigger kid in full medieval regalia laughing at the smaller child and waving his bag of candy at him as he slowly backed onto the dark side street behind him, shrouded by trees. It could have been just ordinary run-of-the-mill bullying, but the way he seemed to be intentionally luring the other child away from the crowd struck fear into Sebastian. He had to be sure. Sebastian moved between people, weaved through the ever-moving bustle and flow of Halloween night partiers, and hurried over to where he saw the children arguing. As he was drawing near, Spider-Man followed the warrior into the darkness and disappeared from sight. Sebastian practically shoved people out of his way as he raced to make sure the pint-sized superhero didn't wind up like Elsa and the others. "Move!" he shouted. "Move, damn it!" When he got to the side street he had seen the boys go down, Sebastian found nothing but dark houses unwilling to participate in the holiday, not a decoration in sight. Aside from the gloom of the occasional street lamp, everything was bathed in shadow. It was like stepping into a different world after fighting his way through the festive crowd on the main road. The contrast alone was enough to take Sebastian's breath away and make his heart beat faster. He saw something on the ground up ahead, but he couldn't tell what it was in the dark. He approached it with caution, his eyes watching the shadows nervously as he went. When he reached it and bent down for closer inspection, Sebastian sighed. His chest felt tight as he grabbed the Spider-Man mask in his fist and stood back up. "Where are you?" he said quietly as he took a step further, then another. He looked at the houses for some sign of where the child had gone. As he walked, he silently prayed for the kid, hoping to God that he wasn't being ingested. Sebastian took 2 more steps and froze. He heard a gunshot. It came from the other direction, the way Elliot had run. Sebastian looked back that way and then looked once again at the dark houses, neither child anywhere that he could see. "Shit," he said, kicking a nearby tree. "Damn it." He said another silent prayer as he turned and ran back the way he'd come. As he hurried between the costumed partygoers, screams pierced the night that didn't sound like kids having fun. They were blood-curdling, filled with real terror. Then people were shouting, As Sebastian drew closer, he heard people crying. Sebastian slowed down. He walked between the monsters, ghouls, ghosts, and heroes. Someone was lying on the ground. People were squatting nearby. Others were pacing. Some were hugging, sobbing. There were sirens in the distance. Time seemed to slow, the sound of the howling holiday night being sucked away into a vacuum. Sebastian grabbed a vampire's shoulder and moved them out of his way. Instinctively, he put his hand over his mouth, covering the witch mask. On the ground before him was the boy in the skull mask, his chest pumping crimson like a gimmick Halloween fountain. Beside him, Elliot was on his knees. The gun was on the ground by his leg. "He just walked up and shot him," a crying woman in a Wonder Woman costume said. "He just shot that boy for no reason." Sebastian looked at her and then glanced back down at Elliot, who was crying and pressing his hands over the young man's blood-pumping chest, trying his best to put pressure and staunch the flow. Elliot must have felt his gaze. He looked up at Sebastian. I thought it was him," he said. "Oh, God, I thought it was him." Sebastian said nothing. He didn't know what to say, and he wanted to be careful. If he spoke like he knew the shooter, he could be seen as an accomplice. Before long, they would recognize him. The real monster would escape if he hadn't already. As he stood there in silence, though, tears fell from his eyes and disappeared into his beard behind the green plastic mask. "This was somebody's kid, like my Elsa," Elliot sobbed as he pushed on the teenager's chest with all his might. "I took somebody's kid." Sebastian stepped backwards and let the vampire fall back into place, comforting a nearby mummy. He felt for Elliot, but there was nothing he could do for him now. He should have gone to the hospital the first night when the police wanted him to. Sebastian should never have let him come. For that, he felt responsible. If the guy wasn't completely lost before, he would be now for sure. Elliot didn't deserve to go to prison, but Sebastian didn't see any way he would end up anywhere else. Sebastian didn't want to join him, and he would if he hung around. He reached a hand under the cracked plastic mask and wiped his eyes. Then he hurried back the other direction. "I should have stayed," Sebastian thought. He knew he was on the shapeshifter's trail, but he left to see what the gunshot was, and now 2 boys were probably dead instead of just 1. He turned the corner onto the dark side street he had been on minutes ago, and there was no more sound or action than there had been when he left. He walked swiftly this time despite the fear that tugged at his heart. His eyes traced the shadows as he moved. He wondered if he should have tried to get the gun before coming back here. There were too many watching eyes, though. Someone would have probably tackled him or grabbed him or at least screamed that he was trying to get the gun. There's no way it would have ended well. Unfortunately, now he was unarmed, and if he found the thing he sought, he had no idea how he planned to stop it. He would have to figure it out, but first, he had to find it. There was one house with a light on. Was that a sign of where the thing was, or where it wasn't? Sebastian chewed on his lip. He took a deep breath and headed that way. He was standing at the bottom of the porch when something crashed behind him. He whirled around to see an overturned garbage can and a raccoon that hissed in anger at him before scampering away. From behind him, a voice said, "We're not giving out candy, and aren't you too old for trick-or-treating anyway?" Sebastian turned to face them, staring through his witch mask. "Yeah, sorry. I'm looking for my little brother. He came down this way. He's in a Spider-Man costume. Have you seen him?" "Nope, just you." Before Sebastian could say anything else, the guy went back into his house and shut the door, surely locking it. Sebastian sighed in frustration. The broken mask was still scratching and pinching him. It was starting to drive him crazy. He wanted to scream, to call out for the boy, but it would probably just draw more angry people from their houses to question him. One might even call the police. Sebastian didn't know what to do. He didn't know for sure the thing was even here. It had been doing this a long time. Surely it had a plan. Maybe there was a car and it took the boy somewhere else. Maybe it had access to one of these houses. It could have killed the person that lived there, or maybe even lived there himself during the off-season. Sebastian had no idea. It could have been... Wait, what was that? Sebastian spotted something out of the corner of his eye. He ran over to the sewer grate and grabbed the tiny superhero's still full bag of candy, cussing as he lifted it. There were spots of blood decorating the plastic. Wherever the thing was, it definitely had the boy. Sebastian let out an exasperated sigh as he dropped the candy bag back to the blacktop. "Where the hell are you?" he thought, looking around in every direction. He turned in a slow circle. "Come on! I know you're here somewhere!" Sebastian took a step and stopped. He felt something crush under his foot. Stepping backwards, he looked down and saw a spot of orange on the shadow-covered pavement. Looking around nervously, he squatted down to inspect it more closely. It looked to be a piece of taffy. He was still holding it, rubbing it between thumb and forefinger when he saw a Tootsie Roll up ahead. Sebastian dropped the taffy. He tore the witch mask off. He didn't think he needed it on this street. The small eye holes were making it hard to see in the dim light, and the cracked plastic pinching him was beginning to drive him mad. Staying low, he inched over to the other piece of candy. He was never fond of them, too chewy, but they used to be his brother's favorite when they were kids. Sebastian wondered if his brother had seen the reports on TV. What was he thinking right now? How fast would he turn if Sebastian showed up looking for help? As fast as everyone else, he thought. No matter how close people were, there were lines you couldn't cross, and hurting children was one of them. If the roles were reversed, Sebastian knew that he would never give anyone the time of day if they tried to explain themselves either. If they came up with some insane story of a shape-shifting monster, he would probably just punch them in the face. The images of the grisly crime scenes returned to his mind, and he closed his eyes against them, grimacing. He turned his head and squeezed his hands into tight fists until the nausea subsided. When Sebastian opened his eyes, he took a deep breath. No, there were no allies to be found. After what they said he did, what the thing he was chasing actually did, there wasn't a soul in the entire world that would allow him 2 minutes to speak. Elliot was the best he could hope for, someone who had seen the truth with their own eyes, and he was most likely already on his way to jail or the hospital. It was suddenly clear to Sebastian just how alone he was and would always be from this point on. Focus, he told himself. Was the candy dropped before the bag landed where he found it, or could the kid have kept some? Maybe it was a trail. That would be smart. Sebastian's mom used to tell him things like that when he was young. She was terrified of him being taken and always had all these safety measures and plans in place. To this day, he tended to hold his key between his fingers when he walked alone at night, just in case. He was doing it now. He supposed this kid could have had a similar experience, or maybe even seen something on TV. A trail of breadcrumbs. That was a thing. He was sure of it. Sebastian looked ahead, squinting through the dark for another piece of candy. He grinned when he saw one and moved quicker now. Maybe it wasn't too late and he could still find the kid. There was a roll of Smarties that looked like they had already been stepped on, and up ahead was a Mr. Goodbar. They had always been one of his favorites. He remembered being a kid and dumping his bag out and feeling like he had found a gold bullion when he saw the familiar yellow wrapping. The candy kept going, and so did Sebastian. He was so focused on it that he didn't even think about the fact that he was going off the road. He followed the trail through grass and dirt around the side of a dull green house before he realized what he was doing. He tensed and slowed down as he neared the backyard. He couldn't see anything back there. The streetlight didn't reach, and it was impossibly dark. Leafless trees caught in the autumn breeze swung at him like skeletal arms. Sebastian wanted to call out to the kid, but he feared it wasn't the boy that would answer. Also, he had already encountered one less than friendly person on this street and didn't need to wake another. Just because the house was dark didn't mean that no one was home. His eyes were on the ground, pinned to the candy. He hadn't noticed if there was a car in the driveway. His fingers toyed with the witch mask in his pocket for a moment. Then he took it out and put it over his head, letting it hang around his neck and rest on his chest. That way it was off of his face, but he could put it on quickly if he needed to. Then he took a deep breath, and holding his keys between his fingers, he surged forward into the darkness that was the backyard. He was holding his breath, taking one step at a time. His eyes were now glued on the darkness before him, the candy forgotten. He saw nothing but shapes, what he imagined was a shed in a nearby tree, a large propane grill, all ordinary things. He wished he could see the details. Then he heard it, the chewing and slurping, the swallowing and coughing, spitting and tearing of the monster feeding. Sebastian looked down towards the sounds, and two golden eyes like bright high beams shined at him in the dark. The light from those terrible eyes gave him the image of those awful rotting teeth spilling blood. The meal itself was shrouded in darkness, and Sebastian was now incredibly thankful that he couldn't see the details. The smell alone was enough to turn his stomach. He thought of the boy in the Spider-Man mask and found himself quickly wiping his eyes. The monster didn't stop for him. It continued to eat on all fours like a dog. Sebastian was suddenly overcome with anger. It overpowered his revulsion, or was empowered by it. He wasn't sure, but before he even realized what he was doing, he was launching himself at the creature, car keys jutting out from between the fingers of his fist. The thing finally left its meal and rose up to meet him. They fell into the dark, a tangle of limbs. Sebastian was trying to stab the thing, and it was trying to throw him off. They hit the grass, still struggling. Sebastian's back landed in something sticky, and he couldn't hold back his scream. A light flicked on in one of the upstairs windows of the house. Sebastian's keys found flesh, and the thing that ruined his life cried out. It was high-pitched and strange, almost like the squeal of a possum. Then teeth found purchase on Sebastian's shoulder. They were dull and hard and worked with incredible force to crush their way through the meat and bone. Sebastian moaned and whimpered, the pain almost unbearable. When the teeth released his butchered shoulder, he found himself looking up at a young woman with red hair and freckles. He wondered who she really was. Sebastian looked away from the monster and the new face it wore to glance at the house behind them. More lights were on now, and he could hear movement from within. He knew the thing would make its escape in a moment, so he looked back at it, or the girl that it wore. "Tell me why," he said. "Why me? Why did you choose me?" The girl's freckled face shifted, twisted, bubbled, and pulled until it was Sebastian's own face staring back at him. It smiled. Then the face returned to the red-headed girl. "Why not?" she said plainly. A door slammed. The girl bent over Sebastian and took the witch mask from around his neck. He didn't fight her. He was too busy watching as her body rippled like liquid and his keys fell from her side into the bloody grass. "What the hell's going on here?" a woman said from behind him. "Who are you, and what are you doing in my yard?" Sebastian looked back at her and found himself squinting into a flashlight beam. He shielded himself with a bent arm. His lips moved, but before they could make a sound, he heard another female voice. "It's the guy from the news. I followed him here. He grabbed another kid. Please, you have to call the police." The beam of light moved off of Sebastian's face and he turned, his eyes following it to the grass beside him. He wished he hadn't looked, but it was too late. The woman screamed as Sebastian turned his head and vomited, adding to the mess on her lawn. He heard her doing exactly as she was told. She spoke quickly, frantically. Sebastian knew the cops were already nearby after what happened with Elliot. It wouldn't take them long. He tried to scramble to his feet and slipped in the gore of the monster's meal, falling back into the remains with a choked sob. In the quickly passing glow of the homeowner's flashlight beam, Sebastian saw a red-headed girl smiling at him. She turned and walked towards the road, putting his witch mask on as she went. "Stop her!" he cried. "She's a real killer. You can't let her go." "Shut up, you monster!" the woman from the house yelled at him. "I watched the news." "Why would she catch me, tell you, and just leave the scene?" he asked in a panic, slipping and sliding in the wet grass as he tried to get his footing. He heard the sirens. "No, damn it. No." He had to catch the thing first to put an end to this. "She was probably scared or sick or both. You're going to hell. They're going to put you in the chair, you hear me?" the woman said as Sebastian stumbled past her. He could feel the wetness of the fresh kill all over him, and he felt his sanity slipping. He just wanted to scream and sob forever, but instead he charged towards the road. When he reached it, he found it to be brightly illuminated now by the spinning lights of several police cars. Sebastian skidded to a halt, but he looked around, his eyes darting every direction, searching for the redhead. Then he saw her in the distance, strutting purposefully back towards the main road and the dwindling celebration that inhabited it. "No," Sebastian said out loud. He heard the shouts, felt the guns on him. He just pointed down the road. "You have to stop her. Please. Oh God, please don't let her go. It was her. It was all her." Then he was hit hard, his feet taken out from under him. His arms were twisted behind his back and his wrists seized tightly. People were yelling at him, telling him how awful he was and how he was going to rot in prison. Sebastian just stared down the road at the fading image of the girl in the witch mask. He blinked and she was gone. Then he was being dragged to his feet and forced inside a car. The door slammed shut and he jumped. When the police officer got in the front, Sebastian started pleading his case again. "You have to believe me. I don't care about myself. You can take me to jail all you want, but you have to get the girl, okay? Arrest the girl. She's not who she seems. She's not even human. Please." "Shut the hell up," the cop commanded. The car started moving and went to the main road. Sebastian stared out the window as they passed the many sullen people in costumes, all looking shaken and traumatized since Elliot had ruined their festivities, canceling Halloween with one terrible mistake. They shuffled along like so many zombies or ghosts, heads hanging down. One such head turned to look back at him through a cracked witch mask.
Chilling tales for dark nights.